Welcome to the Bread of Life channel. I'm so excited to be here with Lance S. Bush today. We've had him on before. He's a PhD student at Cornell working on PhD in philosophy. And he's done a lot of work with effective altruism. And so we wanted to have a talk today just about our ideas about how to help the world. And I wanted to kind of learn from him in what he's learned about effective altruism and just talk about some of the threats that we think are facing the world and how we'd resolve those. So it's all about saving the world today. And Lance, would you I know you've been on before, but will you tell people a little more about yourself and why you got interested in this topic?
Sure. So I am a graduate student at Cornell in the social psychology PhD program there. Before that, I studied philosophy, and my area of research is primarily in metaethics and the psychology of metaethics. But I'm also more generally interested in the methods used to assess people's philosophical beliefs, especially when you're looking at what non-philosophers believe. So there's researchers called experimental philosophers, which is typically philosophers that are conducting some type of social scientific research. And they're often interested in what philosophical views non-philosophers have. You could also ask other philosophers what they think, but a lot of them are interested in the sort of intuitions and philosophical views of, everyday people going about their lives. So I'm really interested in how you go about asking those questions and how you can ensure that people are understanding the philosophical issues in the way that philosophers do. So a lot of my research focuses on that. I do other research as well, not so much these days, and I'm probably not going to be doing as much of it in the future. But some of that research is on effective altruism and this concept called long-termism. So effective altruism, you could think of it as a perspective and a movement. It's kind of both. But the basic idea is that if you have an interest in doing good and helping the world, there are empirical facts about better and worse ways to go about pursuing whatever goal it is that you envision as making the world a better place. And just to give an example, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of charities, and people may think, if they don't really think about it or do research on it, that any one charity is as good as any other. But the dollar you give to one charity can go a lot further than the dollar you give to another charity, and by orders of magnitude. So one charity could literally save 1,000 times as many lives per dollar given to them as another charity. And so when you're deciding to give that dollar to a charity, who you give it to and what they do with it are very, very big deals. And so from my point of view, I'm interested in both the ethics of how to go, how to think about that, what causes are actually the most important, but also the psychology of it. Why don't people give to more effective charities? How can we get them to care about giving to effective charities? And what sort of barriers are there that prevent people from giving, to the more effective charities?
Now, see, this is I cannot wait to hear what you have to say about which charities are the best, because this for me has been an ongoing struggle throughout my life, trying to figure out where my resources can best be used. And it's so hard to know where to put your money. But before we really get started talking about what you've learned about solutions and charities and other topics, we're talking about how to help humanity. And it feels a little ironic to talk about this with a moral anti-realist, because from your perspective, there really is no such thing, right? Or can you describe, as a moral anti-realist, how do you justify the idea that helping humanity is good?
So there's a misperception, I think, a lot of the times about what anti-realism entails. Sometimes people associate it with really strong forms of nihilism, that there's no meaning to life, that life has no purpose, and that's that is a perspective someone could take. Mm-hmm. But an anti-realist is not committed to the view that nothing matters and there's no point in anything, and you just do whatever you want. Those are substantive, what I would call normative or first order claims. What that means is they are specific claims about what you should or shouldn't do and what's good or bad. But an anti-realist that the anti-realist position isn't about what you think is good or bad or what you should or shouldn't do. It's a perspective on what it means for something to be good or bad, or what it means to say that you should or shouldn't do something. And specifically, the anti-realist simply thinks that there is no objective, or you could say mind or stance independent fact of the matter about what's good or bad or what you should or shouldn't do. So as an analogy, I think most of us are probably not gastronomic realists. Most of us would not say that there are objective facts about what food is better or worse. For instance, if it comes down to vanilla or chocolate ice cream, most of us would not say that chocolate ice cream is better. And if someone prefers vanilla, they are incorrect. They should actually eat chocolate ice cream because it's objectively better. Because we recognize that in the sense in which it's better or worse, it's most plausibly understood as having to do with how it tastes to that person. So someone might be allergic to chocolate, or it might just taste gross to them. The same food doesn't have to taste the same way to everybody. So with respect to the gastronomic situation, we wouldn't say to someone that says, well, I prefer chocolate over vanilla, to say, well, do you think it's objectively true that it's better? And they go, no, it's just my preference. Oh, so you don't like any food at all. You don't care about chocolate or vanilla. You don't have food preferences. You don't value any food. That'd be a strange reaction, because we recognize that you can subjectively value things. So an anti-realist is well within their capacity to care about the world, to have values, to value to value anything a realist values. We just don't think that what we value is correct, like in an objective sense. That's it. That's the only difference.
Right. But see, you're using chocolate and vanilla ice cream, but somebody might say, well, what about the difference between salad and candy? Right? Isn't what we do more like salad versus candy? And, of course, if you eat candy every day, all day, and that's all you eat because that's what you prefer, that is going to have a consequence, right? And so there's a real sense in which salad is much better than, it's objectively better for you than candy. So is it that you are denying that actions have that objective value? Like you're denying that moral action, like that there are moral actions that are preferred. Do you see my?
Yeah. So there's different ways in which a thing can be objective. And the sense in which salad is objectively better than candy is not the sense in which the anti-realist would say that actions are not, there's no such thing as objective moral facts. So if we were to say salad is objectively better than candy, well, objectively better in what respect? Well, there is an objective fact that it is typically more conducive to human health to eat salad consistently than to eat candy consistently. You can imagine, though, an organism with an alternative metabolism where salad would be extremely toxic and candy would be extremely good for it. And in that case, this salad wouldn't be what's best. And so, well, best with respect to what? To health. So once you stipulate what the goal or the standard is, then there are objective facts about what's consistent with or conducive to that goal or standard. What the anti-realist is denying is that there's no fact of the matter about what goal or standard you must or ought to have. So it's not the case for an anti-realist about, practical considerations or how to live your life, that you must be primarily and exclusively concerned with your health. So a person could just say, yeah, but when I weigh how much I enjoy candy versus how much I get health benefits from eating salad, I prefer to eat the candy. And so I wouldn't say that a person that not just prefers, but actually eats the candy more than the salad and suffers the health consequences, that they're incorrect. Because if you ask them, well, you do realize it's making your health worse, they could say, yeah, of course it makes my health worse. I agree. There's an objective standard about making my health worse, but I care more about enjoying the candy. I enjoy it that much. I don't see any fact the person's getting wrong.
Okay. Well, so let me apply that to just, human actions. Like, would you consider helping someone no different morally than killing someone? So and I understand from your perspective, you could say, well, I care, about helping people and I don't want to kill people. That's my personal preference. But could you tell me that killing people is morally wrong?
I couldn't tell you that it stands independently or objectively wrong. What I could say is, I don't approve of it. I don't like it. I think it's bad. I could say all of those things, and that's pretty much all I could say. What I would add, though, is that I don't think the realist has much of an advantage over me, because all they would be able to say is, also, I think it's objectively true that you shouldn't do that. Now, the person that disagrees could just as readily, just in response to me, they could say, okay, well, I don't care what you value, Lance. Like, who cares what you think? But a person could also say to the realist, I don't think it's objectively wrong. I don't care about that. So I don't think that realists have much of an edge in an argument. I mean, all they could just say is, at the end of the day, if a person does not want to comply with you, they want to kill or steal or do whatever, you could stop them because you value stopping them, or you could stop them because you value stopping them and you think what they're doing is objectively bad. I don't think it's giving you much purchase or much of an edge, practically speaking, over the anti-realist.
Okay, I see. All right. So you've done work in effective altruism. So what have you learned about the best ways of helping?
So I haven't done much work, and I haven't done work on the best ways of helping. So I wouldn't be
Okay.
the best person to ask about that. What I've done is a little bit of research on factors contributing to why people would be potentially less willing to donate to more effective charities. So to give you an example of this, let's say I describe to you two different people, and one of those people, both people, they're in a situation where they're trying to decide how to donate to charity, and they're thinking about, well, what should I do? And we ask the first person, well, how do you decide how to give to charity? And that person says, I think about what the recipients of the donation would feel, how much I'd help them. I empathize with them. And I feel the sense of, I feel bad, man, people are suffering. And I want to help people that are suffering. So I think about that. And when I'm comparing charities, I think about the one that pulls on my heartstrings the most. And I give to them because I really care about the people I'm helping. So that's one person. The second person says, well, I go online, I do research on the charity. I find out, how cost effective is the charity? If I give them money, how much do they help people per dollar that I give them? And I do a bunch of calculations, and I have a spreadsheet, and I do all the math out, and I figure out which charity is optimistic, like, for how much it helps people, and then I give to them. What would you think of these people? Well, when we've asked people what they think of these two people, they don't dislike either person. I mean, they're both giving to charity, they're both doing a good thing, but the second person comes off as a little cold, it's not the kind of person you'd want to hang out with, a little bit less than the first person. The first person is nice, they're warm, they're empathic. They're, someone you want in your family. They're someone you would want as a friend. The other person sounds like a weird robot. And that consideration can contribute to why people might not want to be effective altruists. It sounds cold and calculating, and to a certain extent, and some effective altruists disagree with me, it is a little cold and calculating some of the time. The thing is, you have to keep in mind, if a person's going out of their way to figure out which charity to donate to because they want to help people, they're not that cold. A cold person would say, I don't care if people are starving, let them starve. I'm going to go play video games. But that's not what effective altruists do. These are people that dedicate their lives to helping people. And because they do it in a mathematical way, people go, they're cold and calculating. That's a very strange reaction. These are people that care a lot about people not dying. I've done research on that. And when you ask people these questions, they do tend to have a somewhat more positive attitude towards the first person than the second person. And that could be a factor. Part of what's interesting about that is that it could be when people are going about making their decisions, and a lot of psychologists don't look at this too much. People are motivated by what that signals or broadcasts about them as a person. So when people are trying to decide how should I give to a charity, they maybe implicitly, and in some cases even self-conscious and aware of it, if I make a decision, do I just want to make the decision I think is the good decision from the point of view of the recipients of the donation? Or should I be concerned with how I'll look? Am I going to look like a jerk? Am I going to look like a good person? And so people, to a significant extent, are motivated by a desire to broadcast desirable qualities. And I think this is a ubiquitous feature of human behavior. We're always looking out for how can we look good? How can we minimize how bad we look? And that factor affects charitable giving just like it affects everything else.
Yep, that's very true. So what charities do you think are effective?
So what I would say is that people should go to a site like GiveWell or other charity rating organizations and websites that do analysis of charities, and you could read the rationale that they give. And it's not just numbers. They'll often give a qualitative analysis. They'll get into what exactly the charity does, how the charity helps people, how many people they help. And there's a bunch of factors to consider when donating to a charity. For instance, if there's two charities that like per dollar can save the same amount of people or help people in the same way to the same extent, that doesn't mean that the charities, it's an equally good idea to get you and your friends to all donate to one of those charities, because some charities might be more scalable than others. So there might be a charity that if you give them another $1,000, they can do twice as much good as if they just had 1,000 to begin with. So you give them 2,000, they do twice as much good. Another charity might not be able to utilize that money as effectively. And so there's that one factor is the scalability of a charity. So that's just one consideration. I could list off a bunch of other examples. But the point there is that there are quantifiable and characteristics of charities that you would have to do your homework to find out how scalable is this charity before deciding whether you should donate and whether other people should donate. There's also what the goal of the charity is. I'm not going to tell people what the goal of charities don't just save lives. They can improve people's quality of life in various sorts of ways that can vary a lot. And it's hard to measure that. How much do you measure curing a serious illness that causes chronic pain versus curing blindness? I don't know. I don't know how to compare those. So there's going to be a lot of these value judgments that go into these factors, and you could try to the greatest extent possible to measure it. But I'm not the person to do that. That's what other people do. What I would say, and I'm just interested in the psychology of this, the kind of psychological barriers that people have for why they wouldn't want to do this, and some of the ethical barriers. I think sometimes people have they'll say, effective altruism is elitist, or they'll bring up other sorts of objections to it. And I'm interested in considering those. But as far as what charities are the best, I would say go to GiveWell. For many, many years, I don't know what currently they list. It was the Against Malaria Foundation, which provides bed nets for people that prevent mosquitoes from biting them and prevent the transmission of malaria. That it might not be obvious why that's effective, but the idea here would be that it's extremely cost effective to prevent an extraordinary amount of transmission of malaria. Mm-hmm. Compared to other charities, it's just more effective. You could, just to give an example, if let's say you want to cure blindness, well, you could compare how much does it cost to train one seeing eye dog to help a person that's blind to navigate through life, and that might be, I don't know, a few tens of $1,000s, a few thousands of dollars. I don't know the number. But there's also people that are malnourished, and if they just get the right kind of vitamins, it'll completely prevent them from going blind in the first place. And those, you could, potentially provide vitamins to several hundred people, or at least dozens of people, that totally prevents blindness for every one dog you could train. So, wow. I mean, between the two, it's that one. I don't see what the controversy would be. I mean, if you actually think providing one seeing eye dog is better than preventing, say, 200 people from going blind, I don't know what to tell you. That's a very strange attitude to have. But a lot of people react negatively to this. They're like, so you're saying we shouldn't provide seeing eye dogs to people? No, I'm not saying that. It's great when you provide seeing eye dogs. Give everybody a seeing eye dog that needs one. It's just the question, like, we live in a world with limited resources. There's only so much we can do. And the furthest you could go with that dollar, the better, I think.
Right. Yes. Okay. Well, let's take a minute to say hi to people in the chat. And I also wanted to let you guys know that we are going to let people on to have a discussion with us after Lance and I have talked for a bit. So if you have thoughts to share about this, we'd love to hear from you. So hello to Zing. Hey, KL, Pigs Can Fly, Dragon. Glad you guys are here talking. Popsicle Ocean, Pavi, Roya, hello, Elizabeth, and sorry if I missed anybody, but glad you guys are all here. And we do thank you for putting your comments. And so if you have questions as we go along, please put them in or get ready to join the stream after we've talked some more. So Lance, what have you learned about what is not effective?
That's a good question. What's not effective? Well, one thing I could say is a lot of people think that charities that have high overhead costs, so that's how much money they spend on administrative costs and things like that, instead of what goes directly to the recipients of whatever the charitable cause works on. A lot of people think that the higher the overhead costs, the worse the charity is. That's not true. It can be the case that administrative costs can be excessive or misappropriated or used in an inefficient way. But what really matters ultimately is how far they go with the money that they do spend on the recipients of the donation. So you can imagine two charities, one of which has no overhead costs, it's only volunteer work, and one of which spends 30% on overhead costs. And you might think, okay, well, the first one's better. They spend 100% of the money on the recipients of the donation. Okay, but what if the volunteers are not very good at what they do with the money? And the other one, so let's say they're both providing medical care, and one is volunteer workers and the other hires doctors. And the doctors, you look at the two charities, you say, well, what do? The first charity saves 100 lives by performing emergency surgery. The other, for the same amount of money donated, they spend 30% to pay doctors, but with the remaining 70%, they save 5,000 lives. It's a better charity. So like, you can't just look at overhead. So there's certain sorts of considerations you could look at that people have a misunderstanding about what considerations are relevant to what makes a charity better or worse. Overhead is definitely one of them. But a lot of the focus I recognize has been on charities, and that's not the only way to do good. So there's also questions about career choice. So it's not just what you do with your money as far as charitable giving, but what you do with your life, how you spend your time. If you're looking for concrete answers, I might not be the best person to ask. What I would be more interested in assessing are what kind of causes are worth considering. So charitable giving is one thing, career choice is another. I'm not sure so the question was what's like not an effective thing to do?
Right. And I mean, maybe this comes out of my own personal experience, because I feel like I have learned like the hard way about some things that are not effective. And so like, we've just had so many experiences where, we were approached for money and, maybe gave to something and then realized, oh, that was such a mistake. We shouldn't have done that. So like I said, this is one of the things that I have personally wrestled with almost more than anything, is just like, there's so many needs. There's always needs. There's always people like really that I would like to give resources to. And it's really always been challenging for me to know where to direct those resources, who to say no to, and what is really worthy of giving money to whether I should direct more of my money toward individual people that I can personally affect and that I know what's happening with them personally, or if it's better to give to organizations where I don't really see the impact. So, it's harder to know what's happening in those situations. So these are the types of things that, that I've wrestled with.
So with regard to the second one, so one concern people sometimes have is, well, if I give money to a charity, I have no idea what they're doing with it. How do I know they're not just, spending it on, throwing lavish parties and they're just drinking a bunch of booze? You could do your research on charities, and you could get, it can never be certain if you're not literally seeing that, like you're not physically going with your own eyes to who's getting the money and witnessing it. You can't be 100% sure, but some charities are more reputable than others. And, you could use a lot of heuristics. For instance, with the Against Malaria Foundation, simple thing. If this was a corrupt charity that were off, spending money on whatever terrible things they might be, buying yachts, wouldn't we have found out about it by now? Like, why would one of the top or most effective charity rating organizations in the world totally fail to notice that they were buying yachts with all the charitable donations? It's just very implausible. And with the amount of really smart, really competent, really well-motivated people giving to these charities, it's just deeply implausible that none of them would have looked into it. Now, that doesn't mean you should outsource all your thinking to other people, because then you would be outsourcing which charity is good to some organization that says, hey, this is a good charity, and then outsourcing whether they're reputable to other people's decisions. Because if everybody did that, none of us would be personally checking. So fair enough. I'm not saying you should just not think through these things. But often I think that people are concerned that they don't want to give to charity because they're not seeing it, not because they have a legitimate reason to think the charity isn't really doing good, but because it doesn't feel as good. So there's this thing people talk about ineffective altruism and charitable giving called this warm glow. And, when you do something nice for other people, you could feel good about it. And, that's a good thing. You should be rewarded for doing good, but it shouldn't be the reason why you do good, because then it becomes, this very egoistic thing where you're not really doing good because you care about people. You're doing good because you want to feel good about yourself. And you don't want that to be the factor driving you. And so if it comes to a charity where you could help someone personally and you could witness the person being helped, you have to be careful that the reason you're doing that isn't because you want to be confident you're really helping someone. And you want to be sure it's not because you actually just want to see what you did and feel good about yourself. Yeah, look what I did. Look how great I am. I helped that person. That's I don't see that as a good motivation. You know what I mean?
I don't either, Lance.
Funny.
I agree with you, but at the same time, I challenge that on your moral anti-realism, because who cares what motive they're doing it? The person is getting help. So why would we even care what their motive is? But when I mean about my doubt about giving to big charities, doesn't have as much to do with like when I say that I don't know like what's happening, it doesn't mean that I'm concerned or suspicious that they are abusing the funds. It's more that what I've observed from like the bigger an organization is, the harder it is for it to basically understand the needs of the people on the ground that they're impacting. So, and it's hard for them to be flexible and make changes according to the needs. And so, like, for example, I'll just give the example, of when we lived in inner city Baltimore, one program that is needed, but I would say it could greatly benefit from a major change in direction, is the food stamp program. The monthly food that anybody under a certain income level can receive from the government. For some people, that was a very good thing because, if there was a single mother not working, taking care of 5 kids, I mean, that is a worthy recipient of that money. But what we saw every single month, as soon as the food stamps would hit, people would be knocking on our door. Hey, will you give me, $100 and I'll buy you $300 worth of food stamps. And what they really wanted was drug money. And so we didn't do it. We would always tell people, no, that's illegal. But that was a major thing that happened in that neighborhood, is that every month, really where the government money was going was to funding people's drug habits. So, but who can pay attention to that? Who can care about that? Well, the issue is that is a broad government program and there's nobody on the ground with oversight of that. And so, like, this is what I'm talking about with the benefit of giving to a large organization, is that large organizations can often have a much greater scope and impact, because people pooling their money together can do bigger projects and achieve bigger things. But it also does sometimes miss out on the personal aspect is something really important. It's not about the warm glow, but we also have to remember that, recipients of charity can be harmed by that charity. And especially if there's not a balance of give and take, like, if people are always on the receiving end of charity, that actually diminishes if they're not able to give back to the people that are giving to them in some way, then it kind of, it's diminishing to the self-respect. It's like, there's problems with it. And so we have to be careful that we're not actually harming the people that are on the receiving end. And also that the personal aspect is important. When, for example, in the same neighborhood, our neighborhood was often receiving charitable donations from people. And like, for example, backpacks for the homeless. Now, I understand that people who are giving backpacks to the homeless, they're doing it with great love and concern for homeless people. But, and I don't want to like, I shouldn't probably pick on that one particular thing because, it may be having a great impact. But what I would see is that, the homeless people would come and get the backpack, and that's great, but it's gone in 2 days. I mean, it's not really having an impact of making a change in that person's life, and it's missing out on, like, you can get a backpack and receive no love for, no loving connection. But if it's just like a, thing being done by a charity, but you can have a much greater impact by, like, actually encountering that homeless person, right? Having a relationship with that homeless person. And maybe in that context, maybe you do give them a backpack, or maybe you see that their need is for something else, actually, and that there's a better way that you can help them, a way where the money you spent is not going to be spent on something that will be left on the street, in the next 48 hours. So this is like what I mean by, sometimes giving to these organizations, it doesn't always have the same kind of impact that you can have if you are one-on-one with a person, when you actually understand the true need that that person has, and you're fulfilling that with not only financial giving, but also relationship. And having that relationship then allows that person to give back to you. And so they're not just receiving. Uh-oh, guess we lost you. I guess I can remove Robot Lance.
Yeah, I'm back. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. How long
Like
were
I
you
said,
gone?
problems with it. Yeah,
I thought I was talking to you. Where did you stop hearing?
You were, I think, making a point. You had the example. I mean, it was just like 2 seconds, so I think you could just continue.
Okay. So, basically, like, if you're giving personally to someone, you understand their need, you're in relationship with them, and then they have the opportunity to give back to you. And that is a much healthier way of doing charity, because, it's not all about like, oh, well, this poor, impoverished person needs my help and I'm here to save them. Then you actually, there are ways that that person can also benefit your life. And when you have that personal relationship with them, then you can also be on the receiving end of what they have to give. And so those are kind of some of the things that I've learned, and why I tend more toward giving personally to people. But there's like dangers with that too. So like the giving personal, so I tend more toward that, but I do have charities that I give to every month. But I would say the greater, I've found that, it's more important to me to have, be able to have resources to give to people in need that I personally encounter. Because if I directed all my resources toward, let's say, malaria nets, then yes, I might be saving more lives that way. And that is definitely a consideration to have. But if I do that, and then I am confronted with a person in front of me who is in need, a desperate need in front of me, and I have no resources to help them, then I feel like I'm kind of missing out on an important aspect of being present in my community.
Yeah, I understand that. And it really comes down to what your priorities are. I don't think that everybody is motivated exclusively by this desire to minimize suffering and maximize well-being. People want to live their lives along in multiple dimensions, and one of their concerns is with there being less suffering and more happiness, but another is with being a member of a community, being part of a nation or a neighborhood and a family. And people have all these competing drives and motivations. I mean, if you ask people, hey, I know you set aside, $50,000 for your children to go to college, but you realize you could spend the $50,000 on this other person's kids for them to go to college, and their kids are way more promising student than your kids. They're going somewhere. What are your kids are going to get a degree in art history, and they're going to go be a doctor or a lawyer, or they're going to do something better. They're going to be an astrophysicist. So give your money to them to be more effective. Might be true that it'd be more effective. Not everybody's kids have the equal potential to have a positive contribution to the world. Does that mean that you just say, yeah, I guess you're right, and then you just tell your kids, sorry, the neighbor's kids are more talented than you? That seems ridiculous. And I'm not sure that it's wrong to see that as ridiculous. These are our only priority in life. Giving our money to whoever has the most promising kids, that seems strange. So no, I think most people want to promote their family. They are partial towards their families over other people's families. Maybe if we were constructing humans from scratch, we would modify them to make them all impartial and care about maximizing all the beneficent good that they could do and minimizing all the harm that they get. That's not how humans are constructed. So what I would say is, once you specify your goal, there are better and worse ways of pursuing that goal. If you've set aside a certain portion of your money, and that money you want to give it to a charity that's going to do the most good, there is a fact of the matter about which charities do more good or less good once you're clear on what you mean by good. One way to put it is, if your goal is to save the most amount of lives, there are charities that are better than others for doing that. If your goal is to be a member of your community that's part of that community and is embedded in it and involved in it and is setting aside some resources so that the people around you aren't suffering, there are better and worse ways to do that, but they would be different than the ways that you would go about assessing what the best, overseas charity would be. So I wouldn't want to tell people what their there's a fact of the matter about what their goals should be. I would hope that their goals would be pretty similar to mine. I don't want people to donate to charities that increase climate change or, I don't know, kill koalas or something. That would be ridiculous. Why would I favor people? I'm not just open to people having any charitable cause they want. Let's donate to blowing up the moon. Like, no, I'm not going to help people do that. So hopefully there's overlap, but it's just that people have different types of objectives. Be a member of your community, be a member of your family, be a member of humanity. And within each one of those, there's facts about better and worse ways to do that. And we can be more careful about how we think about that. And one thing I would say is we shouldn't just trust our gut. We shouldn't just trust our intuition if we're trying to do what's good. That we need to think carefully about how to do good. Mm-hmm. I don't. When put in those simple terms, I don't think that should be super objectionable.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I want to get details about then what you've decided is good and what you do. I mean, I don't know if you want to get that personal, but I want to respond really quick to this comment. KL says, homelessness expert Christians say, don't give money to the homeless directly. That's very ineffective and usually quite harmful. I totally agree with that. I completely agree. I know it's hard to pass that person on the street with a sign, but it is not helping them to give it to them. However, what I started doing is I printed up cards with my phone number. And so I started, stopping every homeless person, anyone who was holding a sign. I would say, yeah, I'm not going to give you any money, but if you want to get off the street, I will walk with you. I'll take your hand. We will find a place for you to live, and so if you're interested, call me, we'll talk. If they wanted to talk right then, if I had time, I'd talk right then. But I gave out many, many cards. I did end up helping quite a few people get off the street using that method. But I had to get to the point where I was very strong. I would not even buy them food. Like it was, just where even if they were asking for food, I would say, no, I'm not going to buy you food because I don't want to help you stay on the street. I will, if you want to get off the street, I will help you get off the street. So you don't have to be out here, and we will find a place for you today if you want to get off the street. So I personally believe that is at least in America, that's a good strategy, but it does require commitment on the part, on your part. If you're going to do that, it is a commitment to do that. But I definitely don't advocate handing out money to people holding signs. In fact, it's usually, yeah, I do believe that is harmful. So anyway, do you have any comments about that, Lance?
Yeah. So, and you were also interested in what kinds of causes I think are better causes to give to or to be concerned with. A lot of the focus so far has not just been on charity, but been on charity that helps, say, people that are suffering from poverty. And that's a really good thing to work on. There's lots of good things to work on, but this is one area that not only is this really important, this, people that are in poverty can't buy food. They don't have shelter. They don't have the things they need to live a good life. If they're, super duper impoverished and they're homeless and they're on the street, it's a struggle. So helping these people makes the world a better place. There's more indirect ways to make the world a better place. So if you look at the kinds of technology that we have computers, we have infrastructure. If you look at the data on how many people die from tsunamis and hot and cold and starvation, all these sorts of factors, the biggest factor that has contributed to people not dying from or suffering in all these horrible ways has been scientific and technological development. So, one of the kinds of things you could care about is maintaining scientific progress, supporting the social and economic infrastructure that allows scientific research to take place. Those don't yield immediate and direct benefits from people. A lab that's working on famine-resistant crops is not feeding anybody directly. They're not putting food in. They're not preparing food and feeding anybody. They're not helping homeless people get a home or get to make a living. They're not doing anything like that. They're doing research on how to make crops more efficient. Okay, well, once they do that, then someone has to buy the crops or the seeds. They have to grow them. They have to prepare them. They have to deliver them to the people that need them. There's a whole bunch of intermediaries. And at every one of those steps, every one of those removes, it removes some of the emotional salience, the emotional impact of that. And so if you think about with, beakers and like little droppers and looking at funny colors and things and test tubes, it doesn't really look like that, but you get the idea. That doesn't feel healthy. It doesn't feel warm and charitable. It doesn't feel like you're connecting with anybody. And yet that stuff can have so much more of an impact on making people's lives better, if not now, then 20 years from now or 100 years from now. So that's one consideration, is that the ways to have a positive impact are often non-obvious and indirect. And yet you still need to keep that in mind if you're concerned with helping people. And this matters both with how you think about charitable giving, and it matters with what sorts of laws and policies and institutions and how governments use their resources that you should think about. And then finally, it should be a factor in how you think of your career. A lot of people might think, well, if I'm a doctor, I'm the one saving a person's life. I'm stopping them from bleeding to death. I'm there if a person gets shot or hit by a car, and I'm saving lives. But if you look at the amount of lives a doctor saves, they might save a lot fewer lives than an epidemiologist or a biochemist, whose long-term contributions from their research findings could save hundreds or millions of lives. So then you have to make that calculation, because every doctor is going to save a few lives if they're even minimally competent. But an epidemiologist, if you're not a good one, you're not going to save anybody's lives. You can make a bad policy decision and cause millions of people to die. So there's very, very, very tough questions that trade off against one another there. But another thing to consider, and this is something that we had discussed before the show, is this idea of long-termism. So the idea is that a lot of people are focused on the short term. They're focused on helping people here and now. But if you think about how many people could exist going into the distant future. So right now the Earth has, over 7 billion people on it. Who knows how many people the Earth could contain? There's all these estimates. Let's say the Earth even had a pretty modest maximum amount of 20 billion people. Okay, well, suppose there's 20 billion people. They all live an average of 80 years or something like that. And then the Earth continues to be habitable for another 4 billion years. If you look at the numbers for the amount of lives lived, there are so many lives that could be lived. If something were to wipe humanity out tomorrow, if we had a catastrophic nuclear war, or an asteroid hit us, or rogue artificial intelligence destroyed the planet, or whatever, something wiped out humanity or permanently crippled our ability to have a sustainable population with people living high quality of life, having good quality of life. If that were to happen, it would curtail the ability for millions, billions, trillions of people to live good lives. And so one thing we could look at is, if we look at the numbers don't just apply to people now, they apply to everybody going into the distant future. So one of the things we could do is to be concerned with safeguarding the future against existential risks, anything that would permanently threaten like cause a human extinction event or permanently undermine human civilization. So to me, I think those are very big concerns. People are not showing enough concern with them. They think way too short term. And then I think we need to turn our attention a lot to determining what are the biggest risk factors to human civilization and what can we reasonably do to mitigate them as much as possible. And how do we go about doing that?
So what do you think are the biggest threats?
So there's a lot of debate in the online communities about this. There's what's called the rationality community, and a lot of them are on this website called Less Wrong, so people could check that out. There is a book on this by Toby Orton. I think he has co-authors in that. I don't remember. Well, the book is called Precipice. It's an excellent book. You should check it out. I don't remember his breakdown of what he thinks the greatest and least likely risks to human civilization are, but he's more of an expert on that than I am, so check that out and look at his calculations. I think he puts like a 1 in 3 chance of us not even making it out of this century. So, people that have looked into this and studied this a lot think that there is a very, very high risk of humanity wiping itself out. So as far as the risks, you can divide them into a couple different categories. There would be anthropogenic risks, so anything that humanity could do that could wipe us out, versus natural disasters and that sort of thing. So as far as anthropogenic risk, one of the biggest and maybe most counterintuitive would be the risk posed by artificial general intelligence. So if we manage to produce an artificial general intelligence, and there's a sort of runaway effect of this thing vastly outpacing human competence and human manageability, if that thing's values are not aligned with our values, and it's vastly superior at achieving its objectives, we're in trouble. We would lose that contest against an artificial intelligence that's much smarter than we are. So if we're going to produce artificial intelligence, and it's really more a matter of when than if, we need to be very, very careful. We would be, I think Elon Musk has put it, summoning the demon. So we have to be very careful about that. That's a metaphor, no actual demons. We have, and the reasons for that, there's another book by Nick Bostrom called Superintelligence, where he goes into what is meant by superintelligence. How much smarter could a machine reasonably be? Smarter in what ways? And why does it pose such a risk? So there is direct work on why artificial intelligence would be a big risk. Other sorts of factors, nuclear war, or just any kind of war using bioterror, any sort of man-made technology or weaponry could potentially wipe out a lot of people. One of the ones that would be very salient to anybody now would be a bioengineered pandemic. We're currently dealing with a pandemic. Imagine one that, stayed dormant in people for 6 months or a year, and then when it activated, it had a 99% kill rate. That could spread all over the earth and kill almost everybody pretty much overnight. Well, sorry, not overnight. It would take it, a couple of years. But, a pandemic that's engineered by people to be super duper virulent could be a serious problem. So that's another sort of anthropogenic risk. Another one would be some sort of technology that would allow a permanent global tyranny that would be unassailable. You can imagine something like George Orwell's 1984, but they have, devices they put on people's heads and just control them. Now that might sound a bit far-fetched in science fiction, and it is. We're not in a position where governments could do that right now. But the point is that as technology advances, we don't know exactly what we're going to face, but we do know people could engineer viruses, they could engineer weapons that could wipe out humanity, and that's a big risk. So those are big risks: nuclear war, bioterror, artificial intelligence. I would put all of those in the highest risk category. There are non-anthropogenic causes. These would be ones, an asteroid or a comet hitting the Earth, that could wipe us out. Various sorts of phenomena that could happen in space that could kill us. There's even very, very far-fetched an alien invasion. I don't think it's very likely. You have the Fermi paradox. You have no indication that there's any aliens out there that are visiting us. Maybe they're stuck on their planets, but they're not here. So there's all sorts of potential risks that wouldn't be caused by humans. The chance of those are not super duper high over any relatively short period of time, but those are also risks. And there are steps we could take to avoid those risks. We can use, infrared satellites to spot and catalog asteroids and make sure we know where they're going and what their chances of hitting us are. And we have speculative technology for how we might deflect them and prevent them from hitting the Earth. So there are practical steps that could be used to prevent some of these things. So those are some of the risks.
Wow. Okay. So, what ideas what can we do to fight these threats?
So some of them I wouldn't have the answers to. As far as actually most of them, artificial general intelligence, a big question there is this value alignment problem. The question to be, if you're going to, let's say you design an artificial intelligence, and one of the things you might want to do is it's very hard to make an artificial intelligence that's much, much, much smarter than you. I mean, you have to be pretty smart to make a smart AI in the first place. We haven't even managed to make general intelligence yet. So if you're designing that thing, one of the things you might want to use is like evolutionary algorithms or some sort of process for having it put itself in a position to rewrite its own code, to make itself better. So if I write a program that is self-teaching, and then I say, okay, go, just teach yourself, and it gets smarter. And then once it gets a little bit smarter, incrementally, like it gets a little bit smarter, it's able to write its code to make itself even smarter. And now that it's smarter, it could write its code to make itself even smarter. So you get this iterative, self-improving artificial general intelligence. If you designed a program like that, and you started out by saying, hey, listen, use all that intelligence to give humanity the answers. Tell us what to do. Tell us how to make our crops better. Tell us how to cure diseases. Tell us how to stop having wars. Help us out. Make humanity flourish. If you start out with that goal in there, and it's rewriting its code, a lot of things could go wrong. It's not necessarily going to be malicious, like it's like, ha ha ha, I'm going to get the humans. It doesn't have to be like that. It could, just as a simple one, imagine you program an AI and you just say, hey, I want you to minimize human suffering. The obvious solution might occur to it, kill all the humans and then they can't suffer. So one of the things we have to be concerned with is an artificial intelligence isn't going to, like, what's obvious to us would not necessarily be obvious to it. It might see that, well, that fulfills the goal, so of course I'm going to do that. But we might recommend, no, but not that way. That's not what we wanted. We wanted you to end suffering, but I guess we didn't specify what we really wanted. We wanted you to end suffering, but keep humans alive and have them have good lives. But you need to tell it that. It doesn't know that if you don't tell it that. Mm-hmm. So there's people working on addressing those sorts of questions. How would you design wouldn't make these kinds of mistakes? Well, to do that, you have to figure out, well, if we want an AI to give us what we want, we better figure out what we want. And that is itself a difficult question. And this is where I would come into looking at this work, because some people might be interested in asking the question, well, shouldn't you have the AI tell us what the objective moral facts are or act in accordance with the objective moral facts? Well, if there aren't any, then it can't do that. So if you're stuck with what you want and what I want and what other people want, what do we tell it to do? What do we tell it? Because if do we pick a random person and say, do whatever that person says? What if that person's a psychopath and they want to kill everybody? We wouldn't tell it to do what they want. So we got to start negotiating, compromising. What do we want this AI to do? So there's theoretical and speculative work on that going on. So that's addressed one issue. How to prevent nuclear war? I wouldn't know how to do that. I mean, that's a question of international politics and disaster prevention and negotiation and conflict resolution. There's people that are specialized in that sort of stuff. How to go about nuclear disarmament? It seems like a good idea to me, to talk people into just getting rid of the nukes. How do you do that? I'm not sure. How do you prevent bioterror? Again, not sure. Those are more applied and practical questions that I wouldn't have the skill set to deal with. I deal with more abstract, broad level considerations.
Mm-hmm. Now, Lance, what is your view about how you think religion contributes to solving the problems of the world, or does it hinder? What's your view on that?
I'm honestly not sure. So religion can serve this helpful role in unifying people around a common set of values. Rituals can bring people together. They can make people feel connected to one another. That could be a good thing. On the other hand, I wouldn't have to tell you or anybody listening to this that religion can also be a source of conflict. People get into fights over their religious differences. People might very well get into fights. I don't know if they get into more or less if they didn't have religion. I suspect maybe less, but it depends what you're replacing it. What if they replace it with, really vicious secular political ideology? Then they might be just as violent. I don't know. So it has this problem of being a kind of double-edged sword. The more you get people to unify into groups together and work together as a cohesive unit, the more you risk that those people are going to take a hostile or at least indifferent stance toward people outside the group. So you get this in-group, out-group effect, and that could be a real problem. How do you get around that? Well, one way to get around that would be to get everybody to have the same religion. But how do you do that? Attempts to do that by the point of a gun, I don't think that, if you succeed, maybe you would somehow get, all of humanity to work together better, but more likely you're going to end up with mass bloodshed and wars and a whole bunch of terror and horror and death and suffering and mayhem, and then you wouldn't even succeed. So you kill everybody for nothing. And another thing is it's going to depend on the substantive content of the religion. If you have something like Jainism where people are absolute pacifists, maybe that would be a good thing. It's hard to see someone being a consistent Jain and then also going to war. But people's ability to distort, confabulate, and alter how they construe or interpret religious texts or doctrine in a way that would suit their personal agenda seems pretty extraordinary. So even then, I think if you gave enough people enough time, they would find a way to contort religion towards their ends. So I'm not sure. I don't know that it serves any straightforward positive or negative effect. I think it's a very mixed bag, and it's very tough to tell what the advantages and disadvantages are.
Cool. Well, so Christianity, for example, has love as the highest goal. So if love is the highest goal, what do you think that should look like in an individual's life? Like, in your opinion, as an outsider, what should a Christian's life look like if love is their highest goal?
Yeah, so it's really going to depend on what you mean by love. So the love, there's different kinds of love. I think the Greeks had different kinds of words. It's eros, and they had romantic love, and love for friends. I don't know what other kinds of love there are. It really depends what you mean by love. I tend to think of it as a genuine compassion and concern for other people's welfare that's selfless. It's not about what you get out of it. It's about this person has their own experiences, their own lives, their own interface with the world, and that matters. And it's important that they get, that they don't suffer. And it's just a concern for other people. How does that manifest? I don't know. That's a tough question to ask, because it'd be easy. It's easy to just say that, but then how do you apply that? It would, is it unloving to discipline kids? Because that can seem mean, to scream at a child or to punish them and make them miserable. Well, your concern is for their long-term welfare. If they don't have discipline and they're not, learning to be a functional member of society, you're not doing them any favors. So showing love for people does not mean going easy on them. It doesn't mean necessarily being real soft on people and not being tough with them. But how to strike those balances is always going to be a real tough practical question. And in a lot of these cases, what I would say is just there are tough empirical questions, and I think people need to keep that in mind. So if you're raising children, how should you raise children? Well, one thing I would imagine is that there's no single way to raise children. It's going to depend on children are different from one another. And so you're going to need different types of ways of disciplining children. The same way of treating one child might not be effective for a different child. And I bring up children just because that is where a parent is in a very specific role to influence a person's life. But this applies with coworkers, with friends. So if a friend let's say you have a friend and they want to get a job as a musician, and they go, hey, I'm going to be playing tonight. Do you want to go to my gig? Do you want to check out my music, support me, buy my t-shirts? What if they're bad? What if they're a bad musician and you think that their chances of success are negligible? Should you tell them? I don't know. What do you think?
I would try to be as honest as possible without killing someone's dream.
But what if their dream is one that you could, in a certain sense, you could see the future, they're going to try very hard for several years. They're going to eventually recognize, They go to the third or fourth record label and they're like, look, you're bad and you're never going to be successful. And they finally get it. And they go, you know what? I am bad. And they give up. Well, now they wasted years of their life that they could have been doing something better. And then they come to you and they're like, I spent years, pursuing my music career and it just didn't work out. What? You told me I was good. And you're like, yeah, I wasn't, but you're not, and they're like, well, why didn't you tell me? I remember this is an example from Sam Harris has a book called, I think, Lying, where he proposes this, he's like very, very anti-lying. I think he makes some good points in there. I don't agree with all of it. I don't think we could go through life without lying ever, and I don't think he makes that claim. But the point is there that I suspect, generally speaking, a loving way to treat people is to be more honest than we typically are. I think people rationalize away being more blunt, direct, and honest with people because it makes them uncomfortable to be harsh. They feel, I'm going to hurt this person's feelings. And a lot of times I think because if you think that, and the other person thinks that, and the other person, there's this norm that you just don't be too critical with people, we can all sort of be setting ourselves up for failure because we're afraid of the truth about ourselves and we're afraid to say the truth about others. Right. And then we can become too sensitive. And I don't think that that's a loving way to treat people. So I think if I would say a loving way to treat people is to be more, not mean. You don't have to be mean. You don't have to say your music is garbage. It makes me want to rip my ears off. You don't have to say that. You could say, listen, to your friend, you could say, I love you. You are a good friend of mine, and I don't want you to spend the next 5 years wasting your life. And I'm concerned that you're not good enough. And maybe I'm wrong. So get an honest opinion from people. Maybe ask people that don't like you. Play some music for people that don't like you, see if they like it. Something like that. Give them a way to confirm for themselves. Something like that. You don't have to be mean about it. You have to be sincere about it. So I would say a big part of love is being sincere with people.
Yeah.
Being authentic.
Definitely. Yep.
So
I totally agree. And, like you said, there's some difficult situations where, you do have to be honest in a way that could hurt people's feelings. And that is hard to do. And, but I agree with you that it is often better to say something that's a little bit harder, but may help someone. But I guess in the case of somebody and their music, I would be very careful because they may not be good now, but I don't want to kill their dream for the future. And once again, music is very subjective. I mean, if Radiohead played their music for me, I might say, no, your music sucks, if I was really honest. That's my husband's favorite band, and I mean, they're a worldwide sensation. So, I mean, I don't like their music, but that doesn't mean that their music isn't good. So I guess if I was going to say something negative about a friend's music, I would be careful that, I actually had the expertise to be able to make, a judgment call like that, and realizing that it's subjective. But anyway, maybe this is going too far on one example. I don't know.
No, you make a good point. It's hard to judge in these cases. I don't, that's why you have to be careful about how you frame it. And people need the self-awareness to recognize that maybe they're not in a position to judge. If someone says, is this good music? Do you think I have a chance at succeeding? Maybe the honest answer should be, I don't know. I'm not in a position to make that sort of call.
Yeah. But I definitely agree with you that part of being loving towards someone is being honest, because I appreciate when people are honest with me. And when I can, because, the basis really of any relationship is trust, right? Without trust, you don't have a relationship. There has to be some level of trust for there to be a loving relationship. And so, I mean, at least if the relationship is going to go both directions, I guess you can have a loving relationship that only goes in one direction of someone loving somebody else who is not, trustworthy. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we disagree on this.
Yeah. So do you want to say anything else, or ask me anything about, things that about helping the world, saving the world?
Yeah, so I'm interested in the Christian perspective on long-termism. So, I'm very concerned with making sure that humanity is going to be around for as long as possible. And that would mean preventing natural disasters like an asteroid from wiping humanity out. And that would mean, being concerned about technological development that could, radically extend human life or get us, to colonizing space. Within a Christian worldview, do those things seem unnecessary or implausible? Because I might think if I'm not a Christian, I don't know how I would think about things as from a Christian point of view. I might think, well, God made the world for us. He's not just going to kill us with an asteroid tomorrow. Like that, there's Jesus isn't coming back if we're all dead. So you might just think that's just not going to happen. So there's no reason to worry about that. What do you make of that? Do you think existential risks just aren't going to happen?
Oh, no. I mean, I get concerned about things. I mean, I think about the threat of nuclear war, and that's quite frightening. I think about, I don't really think about asteroids hitting and destroying everyone instantly, but, and maybe it would be for that reason, maybe because I that would kind of conflict with my idea about Jesus coming back. But I mean, there are some things in the Bible that kind of point to things getting pretty bad before Jesus comes back. So, I think there is the idea that a lot of things could happen, including nuclear war. And I definitely want to do everything I can to prevent those type of things from occurring and, polluting the world and all the things that even just, the corruption that's inside every human being from continuing to make the world a horrible place. So I am concerned about long-term risks to humanity. Does that answer your question?
Yes, up to a point. So like suppose that you're in charge of the, I don't know, national budget for what NASA does, and NASA comes to you with a proposal and they're like, look, we're very concerned about cataloging asteroids and celestial objects that could collide with Earth and wipe us out, and we're concerned with other sorts of factors that out there in space that could threaten humanity. We want a bunch of money for this. Would you just think that's not worth investing in because there's not any risk that it would really wipe out humanity?
No, I think that would be a worthy investment because the thing is, I have no idea what humanity might step in and prevent from happening. I don't expect an asteroid to destroy us all instantly, but I'm prepared for that being a threat. So, I mean, I would want to contribute to assisting, but I don't know if that's what I would put the majority of. I mean, I don't know if I would commit a large amount of money to that particular threat in comparison to some of the other things that I think are really big threats. So,
sure.
Yeah,
neither would I, just because I don't think it's very likely. And I think that there's bigger threats. I would just wonder specifically in the case of ones. So do you think, for instance, that human-caused existential threats are more plausible or more likely to be realized than natural ones? Because, you might think something like this. People have free will. If people exercise their free will and they do something very dangerous and stupid and they destroy themselves, hey, they had free will and that's the mistake that they made. So that's possible within the Christian worldview. But that, like, God would not go, hey, I'm going to fling an asteroid right at the Earth and kill everybody. And, people are going about their lives to have plans. God has a plan. And then he's just like, you know what? Forget my plans. I'm just going to kill everybody. That just, I would think from a Christian perspective, that seems like that can't happen, to just kill all humans tomorrow. Like, do you think it's impossible for an asteroid to kill everybody tomorrow?
These are some really good questions. I'm just going to give the answer off the top of my head, but this isn't really something that I've thought a lot about, to be honest. I would say that definitely I'm more concerned about what humans are doing to each other and what they have the potential to do than, some kind of natural event that could destroy humanity.
I agree with that, but that's just because I think that the risk that humans pose to themselves is greater than the risk that the world poses to us.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I do have some more questions. Can I ask those as well?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so one question is, how long do you think human civilization will continue?
I don't know. I really don't know. And I am one of those Christians that kind of stays away from speculating about the end of the world. And I don't think that's a healthy way to live, to be, oh, it's a sign of the end times. We're in the end times. And, this does happen quite frequently in Christianity, where people are, either like looking at world events as a sign of the end times. And I typically stay away from doing that. And the way I think of it is that, Jesus promised that the gospel, the good news, would go out to the entire world. It would be preached to all nations before the end comes. So there's still quite a lot of people in the world who have never heard the good news. I don't expect that the end of the world is coming anytime soon. But with, the way that communication and technology is advancing, it is possible that the good news could reach everyone. It could happen within a century. So I don't rule that out. But I just I don't see every, event and look for like a sign that the world is coming to an end.
Sure. Let's say, do you think humanity will be around 10 million years from now?
Absolutely not. Well, I think actually humans will be around 10 million years from now, but not in this world system. So
fair enough. I mean,
yeah,
like humans, like driving cars and stuff, living in a fallen world or whatever 10 years from now.
Well, I wouldn't rule out driving cars in God's kingdom. I think we might drive cars. But I mean, but what you're speaking about is this present world system that includes all the corruption and the evil and the threats that we're talking about. And I don't believe that will be continuing for 10 million years.
Okay, so when you, and I know you don't want to speculate too much on this, and it's fair if you just I don't know, or you want to speculate. Are we talking centuries or millennia for human civilization?
I would say centuries or millennia are a possibility. I think thinking in terms of millions is quite absurd. And I mean, this kind of goes into, my beliefs about how long we have actually been here. And it just astounds me that people can believe that, life has been progressing for in the billions. Like, I really think that's like a failure to consider how long that is. And I don't think there's good scientific reasons to believe that, life as we know it has continued on for that amount of time.
Sure, that's a whole other question. Do you think that the Earth has been around for as long as, say, geologists think that it's been around for like 4.5 billion years?
Now, that I don't know. And I will say, I think there is some evidence that it has been and some evidence that it has not been. So I think there's evidence on both sides. And so, I'm always weighing like the scientific evidence with what the Bible says. And so I take both of those into consideration. And so right now, I don't believe that the earth is billions of years old, because it contradicts enough science that it calls the science into question. And then it also is not what I think is the best interpretation of the Bible. I do believe you can fit billions of years with the earth, the age of the earth, into the biblical narrative. But I believe in the other direction.
Well, so we could probably return to the other questions. And I do have another question that I really want to ask.
Yeah.
So just a question on that, because I don't think prepared to get into a big debate about the age of the Earth and human evolution and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But why do you think so many scientists would get it wrong? So like if right now we went out and we did a survey of geologists, biologists, people in the hard science, physicists, those kind of people, they would all, not all, but most of them would agree that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, that humans are a product of evolution by natural selection. They would tend to agree with a set of claims that you may believe not only violate much of like the best interpretations of the Bible, but also aren't even scientifically credible. What's going on there? Why are they making such catastrophic errors? What do you think?
Yeah. And your microphone is like kind of messed up right now. I don't know if you can adjust your phone a bit, but like your microphone it's like sounds very robot-y. I think it could be my headphone. But I did understand what you said. Let me change headphones and see if that works.
Sure. Check, and also maybe you could check the chat and see if people.
Yeah, guys, is Lance's microphone messed up or is it my headphone?
Maybe I am a robot.
Well, some of the things that are used to date the age of the Earth, radioisotope dating, which starts with a set of assumptions that we know the element, that none of the daughter element was already present. According to the calculation, it starts with the assumption that there's always been the same decay rate. There's other assumptions involved. So I would say I question radioisotope dating, especially because when you take rocks and you date them with a variety of methods, let's say you date them potassium, argon, uranium, lead, and a variety of methods, you get dates that are different by hundreds of millions of years sometimes. So if these dating methods actually work, if they work in the way that is proposed, then if we take one rock, that one rock should date the same date, right? By all the different methods. All those different methods should date that one rock to be the same age, but it doesn't. And so to me, there's something wrong with the radioisotope dating. So I don't think that's a reliable way of dating the age of the Earth. And then we also find in coal and oil, which is supposedly millions of years old, coal and oil should not have any carbon-14 still remaining. Carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,000 years or so. I mean, I don't remember what the half-life is, but it's in the thousands. It's not in the millions, right? So if coal and oil has been around for millions of years, then we should not find any traces of carbon-14 in that coal and oil. And yet we do. Coal and oil samples have carbon-14 in them. So that calls into question the millions of years. The same thing with diamonds. Diamonds should not be able, they're the hardest substance, right? So is this getting boring for you, Lance?
No, not at all.
Because we're going off on a tangent, but this is a topic I'm pretty passionate about. I'm not an expert in it, but I do think it's worth talking about. Diamonds are so the answer that's sometimes given by scientists, oh, well, the coal and oil has been contaminated and that's why it still has the carbon-14. But then we take a diamond. A diamond is the hardest substance. It shouldn't have this be easily contaminated, right, with carbon-14. And these diamonds are supposedly billions of years old. And yet, why do we find carbon-14 in diamonds? And this has been tested, and there are traces of carbon-14 in diamonds that are supposed to be billions of years old. So why is that? The data is all over the place when it comes to radioisotope dating. The only thing that is, with regard to evolution And with regard to the age of the earth, the only thing that is airtight is the rhetoric. The rhetoric that is presented to us through, academia, and it trickles down to all of our education systems. The rhetoric is airtight, but the actual scientific data is all over the place. So why do I think they do this? I think it's because I'm not ascribing any direct evil or direct intention, to mislead. But I think it's because we actually have generations of scientists who have been indoctrinated into these ideas from a very early age. They've never questioned it. They've never looked deeply into it. If you think about, why do you believe dinosaurs are millions of years old? Why do you believe in evolution? I'm sure that you can point more to what you've been told than the actual evidence that you've looked at. And that is the same across the board for every kid that is educated in our education system. And the scientists are part of that too. So they've already accepted and embraced all of these ideas about the age of the earth, all of these ideas about evolution before they start their scientific study. So they've already been established in that, and they've been told not to question it, really, because if you question it, then people call you crazy and stupid and foolish, right? Like, me saying these things automatically reduces the way that people look at me. They look at me in the same way that they would look at a flat earther or someone who is like absolutely denying science. And most people do not want, they just don't have a motivation to even challenge. So anyway, what's your response to that, Lance?
One thing I would wonder, because the narrative that you're describing here, I obviously I don't agree that this is in fact what's going on with science, but I understand where you're coming from with saying that people are taught to accept these things unquestioningly. I was part of atheist activist groups for a long time. I've been in the atheist community for many years. I'm not really anymore, but many of the people here, they're like, evolution is a slogan for them. It's not something that they understand. And I say this as someone who, as an undergraduate, worked in an evolutionary psychology lab. I have a background in evolution. I've published papers on or incorporating ideas from evolution. I've peer-reviewed articles on evolution. So, like, I've been directly involved in evolutionary theory academically. 99% plus of the people in, say, the atheist community have not. And if I ask them to even describe, like, if I just said what conditions are necessary for natural selection to occur, they couldn't tell me. They would fail a quiz on that. So they don't understand it, and yet they accept it. Now, I actually think that there are good reasons for people to accept things, even if they don't have direct personal knowledge or understanding of them. I accept, the location, the relative mass, and the position and other characteristics of the planets in our solar system. I'm not an astronomer. I haven't studied very much astronomy. I wouldn't have. I don't, and I would have to either rely on, what, Kepler and Copernicus and what they came up with, or I'd have to start over from scratch. I don't have the ability to build a telescope. I mean, how would I do this? I'm not in a position. But right. I still think it's okay for me to trust that astronomers have figured out lots of things about space. I think that we know Jupiter's there, and that Jupiter's a lot bigger than Earth, and that it's a gas giant, and that it has 70 whatever moons. They can figure that out. But I wouldn't be able to confirm this myself. So in a certain sense, I'm trusting the scientists.
Yes.
Now, why do I trust the scientists? Well, I could give a bunch of reasons. But one of the main reasons I would give is it has to do with the methods that they use. The methods are intended to be self-correcting. Now, are they good at that? Heck no. I could talk to you for hours about problems with the catastrophic failure of psychology as a field of empirical inquiry to grapple with the methodological issues. And I could talk to you not just about that, but about the social and sociological factors involved in people's hesitance to raise concerns. If you criticize or question people's research, people get defensive. They don't go, oh, thank you for questioning me. They don't, science, people that are like, I love science. They have this idealized conception of science. And sorry, just to pause real quick. I'm saying this to say that there are elements to which I'm sympathetic to the approach you're taking, despite disagreeing very strongly with the conclusion, which is that, we don't really know the age of the Earth. I think we do know the age of the Earth, roughly speaking. But what I'm saying is I'm sympathetic to aspects of this, which is that I do think people unquestioningly accept aspects and findings from science. I do think people have a naive and idealistic conception of the way scientific practice is actually carried out. It's carried out by selfish, status-seeking humans that make the same kinds of mistakes people make anywhere else. And that people are, there's this idea that if I questioned another scientist, they would go, "Thank you very much for questioning me. The whole purpose of science is to be self-correcting, and I greatly appreciate you telling me that the last 5 years of my research is all worthless garbage." They wouldn't have that reaction. They'd tell me to get the heck out. I don't want to hear your questions. Shut up. They wouldn't necessarily be that rude, but they might be dismissive. I mean, anyone that is a graduate student or a professor that's been in a Q&A session after someone's given a talk, whether it's a job talk or some seminar, whatever, and they've raised a tough critique of a paper or a presentation, they've had the experience of the person giving a dodgy answer that they sound like a politician. They're dodging answering the question, or they just answer a different question. And they always say, "That's a very good question." And then they go on to not answer the question. I've asked questions where I didn't get good answers. Everyone else has. So scientists are not that open to having their views challenged. They can deny it all they like. But the whole point of science as an institution is to correct for our individual failings. I don't take all the criticisms very well. So I do think that in spite of its flaws, the scientific system overall is the best system we have available for figuring out what the world is like. So if science can't tell us the age of the Earth, I don't think anything can tell us the age of the Earth. I would just say that I don't know. What I would not do is then rely on a particular religious text. So anyway, the point I wanted to get at is you created this, that you put forward this narrative that like scientists, people are basically indoctrinated and brought up to unquestioningly accept science. Couldn't they say the same thing about Christian belief?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And so I do not tell anyone that they should unquestioningly accept Christianity. And I agree with you that some people are being indoctrinated into Christianity. But for me, this isn't about science versus religion, because I agree with, and I really like the point you made about trusting. You have to trust someone, right? Like, because you don't have all the answers yourself. And I fully admit I don't have all the answers about these scientific ideas, right? Like these scientific proposals. I don't have all the answers, and I don't have the expertise to be able to really parse out, and actually know what is true. So I am relying on other people for the ideas that I have now. And I'm not relying solely on a religious text. I am relying on science. I'm relying on the minority of scientists and it is real. There are many scientists who completely reject evolution and who reject the age of the Earth as currently presented. Now, I fully admit they are in the minority, but the majority has been wrong many times throughout history and had to have their ideas overturned. I believe this is one of those instances where the majority of scientists have really bought into a story about our origins that is not true at all. The age of the Earth, I'm more dubious about. Like I'm more agnostic about that. Like I said, I'm leaning in one direction, but if I was presented with enough scientific evidence, if I could see that the data was clear, then I might embrace the position that the Earth is 4 billion years old. But with regard to evolution, I have seen enough from the minority scientists who have presented me with the alternative evidence to where it's not just, oh, maybe it's not true. I believe that the scientific evidence against evolution is overwhelming. And that if anyone actually honestly looks at it without a philosophical agenda, they will come to the same conclusion, that the science for evolution is paper thin. It's not even there.
So I could say this, speaking from my own experience. when I started looking into the theory of evolution, at the time I still identified as a Christian, and I picked up The Blind Watchmaker, and then shortly thereafter The Selfish Gene, and then eventually I got to The Extended Phenotypes. All happened to be books by Richard Dawkins. I also got Dan Dennett's Darwin's Dangerous Idea, and several other books. They weren't all by atheist activists or people that identify with new atheists. There's several other books out there. I found the evidence to be not just compelling, but so overwhelmingly compelling that I would say that the fact that life on Earth evolved is hard to reasonably deny given the strength of the evidence. So it's interesting that we both are standing here saying that we're very, very confident of fundamentally different views. But what I would say about that is I don't, and it's possible, of course, that I went into it with some kind of philosophical agenda. But if there were any agenda at the time, it was hesitance and reluctance. And yet I was still convinced. So that seems, one person is not enough to explain anything. And of course, I don't know exactly what psychologically was going on, 20-something years ago. But what would be my agenda? It doesn't seem like, I don't feel like I had an agenda, and yet I found it convincing. What do you make of that?
Well, I would say you did get the books you mentioned were by an evangelist, right? An atheist evangelist who wanted to convince you of something. So if you were telling me I read this scientific peer-reviewed paper and it convinced me of the evidence of evolution, I might be more sympathetic. But you were reading from someone who actually has a very strong anti-religious agenda. And so I think that does make a difference.
Right. But any religious text you read that is presumably coming from someone with a pretty pro-religious perspective. I mean, people have access to Grime, but it doesn't mean I did. And, I have to, a certain extent, if I'm going to navigate the world at all, rely on my own ability to reason through and consider evidence. And it's not like when I read these books that I just went like, well, Richard Dawkins has to be right about this. I have read peer-reviewed articles on evolution. I took courses on evolution. I, have written papers on it myself. This is not something that I just read polemic popular science books and accepted. I've been pretty deeply embedded in this for years now, and I don't think I came into it with this like desire for it to be true. I just don't think that's the case. I genuinely think the evidence is really good.
What do you think is the good evidence?
Well, that's not what I wanted. I think that would take us too far afield. I mean, we could talk about what I would say is that the way you would consider evidence making a compelling case for evolution would not be looking at isolated things like DNA and the fossil record and dating methods and homologies and the morphology of organisms and the geology and looking at where do we find fossils and like look where plate tectonics and how that figures in evolution. There's a whole bunch of different sources of evidence that people would use. What I would say is that I would rely very heavily on abductive inference. What's the best explanation for the overall pattern of data?
Yes.
And what I would say is that the account offered by the consensus within science, which is that organisms evolved over hundreds of millions of years. If you count, bacteria and single-celled organisms, much further back even than that. And I don't think that there's a more convincing alternative explanation than that. I don't think there would need to be. I do think that we could assign an extraordinarily high confidence to this being true, but it's because of what I would say are converging lines of evidence, that the evidence fits together like a puzzle. And when you fit together the pieces of a puzzle, you might be missing a piece here and there, and the puzzle might not fit together perfectly. And that's because when you're dealing with an historical science like evolution, you're trying to describe events in the past. Vast majority of organisms that have died don't fossilize. There's a lot of information lost. So the story doesn't have to be perfect. You can find anomalies, but what you don't find are direct, straightforward, falsifying anomalies. So what was the famous one where someone was asked, how would you falsify evolution? And they said, find a rabbit in the Precambrian. But the thing is, I would bet, if not you, then someone that rejects evolution could point to we found this footprint from a human that's a billion years old or something. They would try to point to these cases. And what I found when I looked into these, I used to go to website, Talk Origins, some of these things. And again, always someone with an agenda. I understand that. I just didn't find the kinds of critiques that were coming from creationists and anti-evolutionists to be very credible. They seem to me that, and I don't have a perfect memory of all this.
Yeah.
This is stuff that I read, 20 years ago. So, I would look at the criticism from someone that's rejecting evolution. I'd look at the response, on a website or from a scientist, and the response seemed good to me. I don't have a perfect ability to assess all this, but I have to use the faculties I have available. And when I weighed all of the testimony and evidence and arguments on both sides, not only did I think that the evidence for evolution was incredibly compelling, I didn't think that people rejecting evolution had much of a case at all. It always seemed to come from people that seemed to misunderstand the relevant science in various sorts of ways that people could explain in eviscerating detail. I looked at that and it looked to me not quite as bad as flat earthers arguing with people that think the earth is round, but it didn't look very scientifically credible. It didn't look like people were offering, here's what's wrong with the evolutionary science, and here's an alternative model that makes more sense of the data. The alternative model was always grossly underspecified. God did it. It's not a very plausible alternative. Sorry, that was a too long an answer.
Well, and I guess our conversation is going off track, and I'm okay with that. But like you said, you're okay with missing puzzle pieces, and I am too, right? I'm okay with missing puzzle pieces. But what is missing from evolution is a mechanism by which information could develop by natural processes, and where the proposed mechanism, mutation, natural selection, could form new structures within organisms, which has to happen over and over and over again. And where the proposal that it happened over millions of years is really not sufficient, because these are, organs and systems that are interconnected and dependent on each other. And so, and would be useless in a halfway formation or something like that. So I don't see that there is a mechanism proposed when we consider the actual scientific evidence for what mutation does to organisms. We don't have evidence that mutation could perform along with natural selection the miracle that needs to happen over and over again. Mutations are mostly neutral or harmful. Occasionally, they can provide some benefit to the organism, but we don't see the types of mutations happening that would be necessary, right, for the building of all these varieties of organisms. And so the answer that's often given to that is, well, you have to consider that we haven't been observing for millions of years. And while that's true, I can't accept your millions of years story without, if we're calling it science, right, then it needs to have a scientific support. Like we actually need observational evidence. We need something that shows how this could have happened. And we just do not have that. And so, you said the only acceptable, like the only alternative is God did it. And I think, and that's not acceptable for you, right? Like that's not a good answer. And so I think that really gets to the core of why people are believing in this story so strongly, even though it's an absurd story. They believe it because there really isn't another alternative. We need life to develop by natural processes in order to avoid this whole God thing.
Yeah, I don't think so. So, for me, it's not about God. I mean, there's plenty of people that believe both God exists and evolution by natural selection has taken place. I don't see a big conflict there. I mean, it's really going to depend on a person's theology. It's not motivating me. I don't see anything logically impossible, or like there could totally be a God. Maybe God could show up tomorrow and be like, yo, what's up? I'm God. And I'm fine with that. I don't think that's going to happen, but I don't accept evolution simply because I need an explanation. After all, I'm exactly the kind of atheist that when Christians will say, well, what created the universe? How did the universe start? Maybe it didn't start. Maybe the universe has always existed. I'm exactly the person, just in recent discussions, is perfectly comfortable saying, I don't know. I don't know.
Right.
And so if I didn't know, or it didn't have a stance on how organismic diversity existed, or how humans could have got here, I would be perfectly comfortable, happy to say, I don't know. So I don't think that that's motivating me. I don't think that it's generally motivating people on our side. One thing I'd say though is you have to be wary of what in the rationality community would be called isolated demands for rigor. So you're pointing to this requirement that we have direct observations. We do. First of all, I would just say we do. I mean, people have observed natural selection in the lab. You might not think that it's adequate or the right kind of selective forces that we're seeing, or there's sufficient types of mutations. You mentioned what sounds to me like irreducible complexity. I think that the responses to that are pretty compelling, that when people look at an integrated system, that if you take out one part, the whole thing doesn't work. And then someone say, well, how could each one of how could it have evolved incrementally? I think the response that the different components actually were selected for different processes, and then they're co-opted. Exaptation is a well-described process in evolutionary theory. So I just think the evolutionist has answers to most of these things. And it's not, they don't just have to say, oh, well, we haven't seen, things happening over millions of years. So there are certain types of informational gaps, but I think that people that reject evolution exaggerate them and aren't aware how much we can observe in the lab and under observational conditions. But the other thing I would say is, if you're going to make this demand that we need to be able to make direct observations, that seems inconsistent with the degree of evidence that Christians seem to accept for other sorts of claims. For instance, I don't think that there's any direct observational evidence that Jesus was resurrected. I didn't see it. All I have are historical accounts. And it's the same thing in evolution. Well, we could say, well, we're building a historical narrative here. So to a significant extent, many Christians rely on historical narratives as adequate or even compelling evidence for religious beliefs that they accept, but they're not willing to accept it for scientific theories that are inconsistent with their religious beliefs. And that seems like a kind of a not applying consistent standard. So I'd be concerned about that. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. I would say that I have a different standard for science than I do for a story, right? I expect science to include the scientific method and observations and things that we can test and repeat. Now, I believe a story. I believe the Bible story. I never asked for any evidence of Jesus's resurrection. I read the story and I believed it, right? I still believe it. And it doesn't matter to me that it doesn't have evidence. So for the story that I believe, I don't require that evidence. But for something to be called science, I think it should be more than storytelling. And the process you described, exaptation, where, it was originally selected for a different process, that is a story. And it's a story that you may believe, but that's what I want people to recognize and separate out when it comes to evolution. What is actually science and what is actually storytelling that includes a lot of scientific jargon? And what I've found in the scientific papers that I've read on evolution and the books that I've read on evolution is that it is incredibly fancy storytelling. And I would like to know, Lance, you're saying that we do observe it. So what is the scientific evidence where you believe we've observed the story that's being told? And I want to clarify too, with natural selection, I didn't disagree with natural selection but natural selection only selects from what is already present. So the contention that I'm having is, how did those things become present in order to be selected? What is the process that occurred that allowed nature to select in the first place? And what I'm saying is, there is no proposed mechanism that has scientifically been demonstrated to be able to accomplish what is proposed.
Do you not think mutations occur?
Oh, mutations occur. But what do we observe when we see mutations occurring? Most mutations are either completely neutral or harmful to the organism. Some mutations, a few, like, okay, we can say the sickle cell anemia, mutation prevents malaria. Great. But that does not help the organism build a new organ or a new system. It's breaking, it's actually taking something broken, and then it happens to have a beneficial side effect. It's like breaking the house rather than building the house. So there's no mechanism that has been demonstrated to be able to build an organism.
Yeah, I would just say the kinds of mutations that do occur are the mechanism. It's just that they're iterative and they take time to accumulate. You're not going to see you're not going to see one generation to the next, an organism just born with a whole new organ. These things are incremental. We can often observe across a range of different species a whole range of intermediary develop organs that are like photosensitive cells in smaller organisms that aren't a fully developed eyes without a lens, eye with a lens. So you can observe just by looking at the fossil record and even organisms alive on Earth, a range of organisms with different degrees to which a particular type of organ that serves a particular function is specialized or adapted towards a very specialized function, or whether it's more general or less specialized for a particular function. So I just think that there are answers to these. I'm not someone that studies evolutionary biology and keeps an arsenal of these sorts of examples handy. I mean, I could point to like something like a nautilus or something like that has different eye morphology than we do. But I'm not a marine biologist. So this is the kind of thing where it takes many different people with many different areas of specialization to provide converging lines of evidence and explanation for these sorts of things. And when people are arguing about evolution, I think that they often might be expecting too much from any particular individual. Again, I'm not a specialist at all. I study philosophy and psychology. I don't study evolutionary biology. So I'm hesitant. It's something that maybe people would say it in the chat if I went and looked at it. Like, this person's not, I'm not trotting out the arsenal of this conventional types of evidence. For me, there are more meta questions about how we go about assessing evidence. And in many of these cases, I'm just extremely confident to the point where I would just bet money if someone said, oh, well, we don't have evidence of this, or we don't have evidence of that. Either if I go and look, there's a good chance I would just find, I'd be like, yeah, this is an example of that. But with respect to the mechanism for building organs, mutation, natural selection, I just think that is the mechanism. And I think evolutionary biologists would generally agree with that. There's a difference between saying we don't have a proposed mechanism that's plausible and saying that we have not directly observed, thousands of generations up to the point of constructing a sophisticated organ in like a mammal or something like that. You might get more rudimentary but reasonably sophisticated development of novel morphology in like flatworms or a simpler organism. And I would bet if we go and look that we would find that.
Lance, I think both things are true, that we don't have the observational evidence and that we don't even have a proposed mechanism that could possibly work. And so, I asked you to give me an example of mutation, that we have seen forming, or a demonstration of how mutation could do this. And I understand that you don't have the expertise to bring out, this long list of examples. But I have asked this question to people who do have the expertise, and they take me to the same thing that you took me to just now. You said, well, we don't have that because it happens incrementally over a long period of time, millions of years. So again, you moved it from the science to storytelling. I don't believe the story of millions of years, and I don't have a reason to believe the story of that millions of years could. I don't think time helps. I think I could give you trillions of years and you still don't have enough time. You would have to defy the laws of physics and everything we know about biology in order to develop a single organ. So anyway, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just don't think that that's the case. I mean, some of this, you could look at like evolutionary simulations that look at what if you iterate this process in a simplified program? How long would it take for an eye to develop, or Kenny to develop, or whatever? To me, there are just so many lines of converging and corroborating evidence that are consistent with you could call it a story. I'm fine with that. The story about the origins of life on Earth. In a certain sense, historical science is going to tell you a story. The Big Bang and how the Earth got where it is. How did the Earth form? That's going to be a story. How did the Moon form? That's going to be a story. Any backwards-looking scientific conclusions we make are going to be a story. But I don't think that that's a reason that shouldn't be considered pejorative or a bad thing or a reason to doubt it. If we were dealing with a murder trial, when the prosecution presents the evidence, they're going to be constructing a story of what happened because it happened in the past. But if they got the fingerprints and a motive and eyewitnesses and DNA evidence and blood under the fingernails of the accused, and you build that story. Here's the story.
Yes.
Here's where they were. Here's how they did it. Here's why they did it. Here's when they did it. Here's how they concealed the evidence. Here's you tell a story. It could be a very compelling story. So just saying as a story shouldn't make people go, oh man, all scientists are doing in these days is just telling a story. Yeah, but it's a very compelling story, and the story is a more compelling story than the alternative. And so, evolution, like a criminal court case, I think the theory of evolution has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. That doesn't, just because it's a story, doesn't make that any less compelling to me.
And I'm a juror too, and I don't find the story compelling. I don't think the evidence has been proper. I don't think there's been any evidence presented that would cause me to accept that story. I definitely challenge the idea that the converging lines of evidence are compelling. I think it's the opposite. I think the converging lines of evidence should point us to the fact that this is an impossible story. It's not a story that doesn't require miracles. It requires many, many miracles, but it doesn't provide a miracle maker. So for evolution, you need miracles. You don't have a miracle maker unless you believe in God, and that's fine. But then, did God use evolution? I don't know. But, I have a miracle maker, and so I don't really have to come up with this story. I'll let you respond to that, and then maybe we can go back to our other topic, and then we can let people in if they want to talk.
I think you wrapped it up well. I think we could leave it off there. I did have one question, which is the question I wanted to ask before we got on this digression. This is a really fun digression.
Okay.
The question was, do you think that there are aliens out there in the universe?
I don't know. And but I would in general say I don't think so.
Why not?
I would be open to the possibility of aliens, but I feel like the story that I believe, which is the Bible, it kind of has the focus on God's creation of, humanity, the other spiritual beings. And there doesn't really seem to be any mention of aliens, unless you want to say the Nephilim were aliens. So it's not really part of the narrative that I believe.
Sure. But I mean, there's dark energy isn't part of the narrative either, but I don't think that's you wouldn't just say there's no dark energy or something just because it's not in the Bible.
Right. And I didn't say there's no aliens. I just don't have any reason to believe in them. We don't have any communication from them. I mean, I don't have anything in the narrative that I believed that tells me that they exist. So I don't really have a reason to believe.
Fair enough. Do you think that there's anything, if there were aliens, and especially advanced aliens with a civilization, do you think if we encountered them and you told them about Christianity and anything like this, would that challenge your faith at all?
Wait, you cut out for 1 second. If I met the aliens and I told them about Christianity and they said
they had never heard of it, you just meet aliens and they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. What would that concern you at all? Would that challenge your faith?
I would say it would depend on what type of beings they were. Because if they were the type of um, beings that are like us and have become corrupt and become unaware of God's presence, then, I mean, that would not be a challenge to my faith, because they would be in the same situation that many human beings are in, just unaware of God's presence. So, but, you know, it would be probably more a challenge if they were perfectly moral beings who were unaware of God's presence.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, it makes me wonder, because from my point of view, Christianity seems very parochial. It seems to treat the whole universe as revolving around the events taking place on Earth. And then when I
Yes.
look out at what, there's, I don't know, 100 billion galaxies, 200 billion, however many billions of galaxies there are. And we're in one solar system, in one galaxy. And then there's just so many galaxies, there's so many planets on them. I don't know if there's any life on them. I think probably there's life. I don't know how many are advanced civilizations. Could be none, could be thousands of them. I don't know. But whatever the case turns out, it looks like we look insignificant from a cosmic perspective. What do you make of that? It seems like if the universe were designed for us, why do we seem like we're in a random location in a random galaxy?
Yeah, well, I can understand the feeling of the randomness. For me, and I've heard people express this, that when they look out at all the stars and they imagine the galaxies and everything, it makes them feel small. For me, it does the opposite, because it reminds me that this, the incredible power of God, like, he is so much bigger than I can even fathom. His power is greater than I can fathom, and his works, the things that he has made, is so incredible. And yet his eyes are on me, this little speck, like a little speck on a random galaxy. He actually cares about me and is thinking about my thoughts, and wants to communicate with me. So for me, it kind of has the opposite effect. It I do very much see God's works as centered on what is happening here on this planet, and in the hearts of every human being. You know, we could go in the opposite direction and go down to like one atom in your body, incredibly small, right? I mean, you're a universe for that atom, right? And yet, like, God is aware of that one atom in your body, and it's important. Like, God knows every hair on your head and every atom, every molecule, everything in your body, and it matters.
Yeah, I suppose this is why I bring up the aliens. So, I mean, I understand that. So if there
Yeah.
were an empty universe, that would
Yeah.
resonate with me to some extent, or at least could understand that
Right.
perspective on it. But if the universe does turn out to be populated by some proportion of civilizations, and then we go and encounter the civilizations, and they vary. Some of them, that beings are more moral than us, some they're less moral, some they're more
Yeah.
advanced, some less advanced. But none of them have Christianity, and quite a few of them have their own religion. So they're like, no, you need to hear about our prophet, like Zorlon or something.
Yeah.
It would start to make you wonder, what makes me think ours is special? Like maybe we're just another one of these planets that has myths.
Yeah.
That's why that's what I suspect is the case. I suspect that we'll discover eventually that the kinds of stories and religious systems that we've created on Earth are man-made, and they seem man-made. And I think that they would seem more man-made if we were to encounter alien beings. But we haven't, so it's not like I could go, gotcha.
Right, exactly. Well, it's interesting because C.S. Lewis actually wrote a space trilogy where he imagined a scenario where other beings existed, but those other beings were not fallen beings. And it was kind of like Earth was kind of like off limits as a corrupted planet, right? And like Jesus, yes, he came and died on the cross for sinners on the earth, but he did not need to do that for these other races, because they had not entered into the same corruption that we had. So it's kind of an interesting proposal.
That sounds kind of cool.
Yeah.
Should we
So-
move on to getting people in here or something like that?
Yeah, let's do that. And while we're waiting for them to come in, and thanks for being here, everyone in the chat. I know I haven't been very paying attention to the chat, but you guys can jump in now if you want. And so we'd love to hear from you.
Can I get a quick break?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yep.
But what were you going to say? Sorry.
No, I can save it for the end. I was just going to ask what changes. One question that I wanted to ask you was, what changes to the world do you most hope to see in your lifetime?
Oh, okay. So I'll address that when I get back, and then we can.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good. Okay, and I'll talk to some people in the chat while we're waiting. So yeah, you guys have the link. Please do jump in. Hi, Jamie. Hi, Joel, Dave M. Awesome. Let me put up some of these comments. Okay. Hi, Zhang. Lance is being generous. Forget other planets. The Judeo-Christian God only knew the Rome and Judea Near East religions. All right. Okay, so Joel says he'd like to join, but he has a staff meeting. Okay, well, thanks for being here. I'm glad you were able to come and participate. Jamie, do you want to jump in? Top Dog, what would be the difference in your life if you discovered your God was just a fictional character? Ooh, that would make a huge difference in my life. That would make... I don't know how I would deal with that. God is extremely important to me. I mean, he's really the source of my life. He's the source of my joy, and the source of love, the source of so many things. And I just can't really imagine life without God, or God, if, you know, he turned out to be fictional, that would really be life-changing. So let's see. Hi, Doki. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Mr. Funk. I've never seen Mr. Funk before. Christianity is so self-centered. I'd love to hear more about why you think so, Mr. Funk. Let's see if you say anything else. Do points make loud whooshing sounds when they go off in your head? Okay, well, that's not a substantive comment. Let's see if there's anything else. So Dave M says, that's nonsense. Atheists do not believe in gods. That's it. Oh, okay. So Jamie was just trying to join us. I don't know what happened. I tried to get him on. Jamie, I don't know what happened, but you somehow disappeared. So try to get on again if you can. Okay, Dave is joining. Hi, Dave.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. How's everybody else?
How's it going?
Are you Dave M?
That's me. I'm Dave
All
M.
right. Nice to see your face.
It's me. I'm doing all right. My chin hair.
Oh, you're echoing a bit. Do you have any headphones?
That's me. I'm Dave
All
M.
right. Or can you turn off your...
I turned it off. I turned it off.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, as far as evolution, Rebecca, very simple. Alleles change over populations. Those are gene frequencies. You can get a DNA test. We can test everybody in the city. We can test everybody in the country. We can go to other cities and other countries, and those frequencies will change. That's evolution. And it's a fact. You can get a DNA test. That's how ancestry.com sites work. Okay, they can tell you came from, East Europe, and if it gets more specific, like if you came from an island, they can even narrow down what island you came from because of these gene frequencies. It's very simple. That's evolution.
Well, what I don't see is how that shows what I am could have developed by natural processes.
That's
so I don't that what you're talking about is genetics. So
well, that's the definition. That is the definition of evolution and how it can be proven. Okay. Now, all the mechanisms, okay, can be debated. You can say that God did it. Okay. That can be your mechanism, and that's fine. But whatever mechanism you go by, there's many, natural selection works off of predator prey is a big one. The predator and the prey are always trying to outcompete each other, right? And it's whoever survives and reproduces that is important. So whoever survived, if you were just a little bit faster, or your camouflage was just a little bit better, you survived to reproduce. And then those gene changes, and they can be very, 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 very minor, are carried on. Now, if your children inherit something from you and they turn around and died from it, because maybe it only worked for you, but it doesn't work over populations, it's not going to work for everybody, then the population is going to go extinct. Because evolution is not what happens just with you, it happens with over a population. Mm-hmm. So what changes over the populations gives rise to what you were asking about of, let's say, front arms becoming wings, okay? That is a slow, incremental thing that had no intention of flight. They were just using those big arms for something else. And then one day they just realized they could maybe hop up into a tree or hop down from a tree and survive. They didn't get eaten by a predator. They passed that on to their children. If it's advantageous, it'll spread around the population. And that goes back to how you can prove that by just getting a DNA test, testing other populations, and you'll see those changes in the gene frequencies. It's that simple.
Well, Jamie, I would say, want to say something?
Yeah, if that's all right. I just a response from my, because Lance brought it up too earlier. I think, so in that sense, I would say, yeah, evolution's true. There's, the way genes work, right? And we pass them along and there's changes. But what Lance said earlier too, people say this all the time, and I'm not trying to call you out or anything. I just think I want to see these plausible, simulations that they do. As far as I understand, there really isn't any plausible ones that really seem realistic with population levels and what we are learning about mutations. It seems to me that, the strong survive, and then to pass on their genes, there is mutation.
The best fit survive. The best fit survive. And
strong
is a wrong word to use, because worms are one of the oldest life forms on this planet, and are still worms because they're best fit to be worms, not because they're tooth and claw. It's because they found a niche and they're very good at being worms.
Absolutely, you're right. That was a poor adjective to use.
No problem. No, that's something that's often confused about it. That's all. Survival of fittest is often misunderstood. Okay.
I understand. I'm more using it as colloquially, the ones most apt for survival are going to be the ones that survive. And it was kind of it was a little bit of a dig on the idea that it's kind of a tautology in a sense, but it describes what happens. I think the fit or fit, in other words, I'm being not a little unfair, I guess. But I would say, that's why I'm a young earth creationist. But I think, so I don't quibble about evolution, but the general theory about common ancestry, I would say, is problematic because of population numbers, generation times, what we are finding out about mutations. And because there's so many little mutations that seem that occur that may not affect the phenotype, but there's that change is still going to be there. And so when it selects for a particular fit creature, right, it happens to survive, it's going to bring along all the deleterious or nearly neutral, I would argue, from what I've heard anyway, or understand, which isn't a ton, that's a problem, because you can't select away.
Are you trying to talk about genetic? Are you trying to talk about genetic entropy?
Well, that's the concept. Yeah.
Yeah, that's rejected by all geneticists,
Well,
and it's only a YEC claim that hasn't been backed up, and is only claimed by people like Nathaniel Jeanson, who haven't been able to back up their claims with peer review.
Well, the Harvard geneticist, and see, this is where bias comes in. There's I say that's why I go by the scientific consensus. So if Jeanson can get a consensus behind him, then I will listen to him, but he doesn't have one. Well, that's fair, but the arguments and the facts presented by Sanford seem to me like, I'll go with consensus in general, sure, but when it comes to, but still someone's claiming that they have a defeating facts for the narrative, I'm going to use my own brain to analyze whether or not and see if that's the case, because bias goes both ways. That's just the way it is. Well,
sure. And if you're not sure of your own self, aren't you going to ask a group of people to check? Because let's say you have 2 apples on your table, but you're telling everybody you have 3, and they keep telling you no, you only have 2. Aren't you going to get to a point of a group of people where you're going to have to concede that the group is right and you're wrong?
Well, yeah, all these motivations are going to matter to be considered. So where I'm at right now, and of course I'm biased, but as far as I can tell, there's like some common sense here where what I feel like and a lot of the facts that Sanford pulls out, and I would recommend his NIH lecture, which is fairly prestigious in a sense, that he would be asked to speak there. I don't feel like there's been a good or plausible rebuttal to the it's kind of a common sense really concept. It's because you look at all the genetic disease, I just don't see how populations with generation times can sustain the type of variety we see in the biome, no matter how much time you have, when you consider what kind of things get passed along, even in a fitter animal. It just brings it along, and it's gonna corrode the genome in other places, and you just can't select it away. I just don't see a logical out.
Well, that's what you have to understand, why the genome is set basically like in layers, and they have redundancies, and they correct a lot of these things. They have self-replicating systems. So even though a lot of these minor little copying errors are passed along, there are basically redundant copies. So the genome is basically looking through, and it's saying, and they fix that little mistake. So they aren't actually all passed on continuously, building. That's a misinformation. Like I say, like Jeanson likes to promote. That's just not true.
Well, they're aware of, by the way, the idea that there's genetic correcting things is rather amazing. How that evolves would be interesting to.
So then,
but the thing is,
you agree then that so then they're not being all carried on then.
Well, no. But the thing is, you got to look at Sanford's presentation, because he considers all of those things and consults.
I know Nathaniel quite well.
but I mean, they
I'm on his
totally make
list.
the distinction. They make the distinction of mutations that are passed along, like they have to happen and occur in the organism so that they're before it's passed on to the next generation. They make those distinctions. So the fact that that you were thinking that is not the case tells me you haven't looked at it very closely, to be honest.
No, I understand what he's saying. What I'm saying is that he doesn't have a consensus to back him up. He hasn't convinced others in the geneticist or biologist to be in his corner. So he may be
Fair
right.
Enough.
He may be right.
Fair enough.
But until he can provide novel testable predictions, okay, which is big in science. One of the biggest things you can do is predict something and it comes true in science, where you can say, if I'm right, this will happen. And it does. Like with Einstein's gravitational wave.
I agree.
He didn't even live to see it. But a couple years ago, they proved he was right. So that was the greatest feat you can do in science. Like I say, even though he didn't live to see it, he predicted, if I'm right, someday when the technology comes along, you're going to predict gravity, or you're going to detect gravitational waves. And sure enough, we did it a couple of years ago. So that's what,
Yeah,
like I said, that's
absolutely.
the problem with YEC,
Powerful.
is that they don't provide novel testable predictions. What they mostly do is they say, oh, okay, science has discovered something, and then they try to find it in the Bible. And that's not how science works. That's not what you do.
Lance
That's
wanted
right.
to jump in here and say something really quick.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to say this is a fun conversation. I wanted to apologize for derailing our whole conversation, because initially we were here to talk about effective altruism and long-termism, those sorts of things. I don't know if we want to keep having a conversation. Like, it's up to you.
Yeah,
Like, do you want
can
to
we
do
try to
long-termism?
return? Yeah,
That's fine.
I think
And
we
you know,
should
Rebecca,
try to return to our topic. If you guys,
I would love to
Dave
do it
and
another
Jamie,
time. I would love to do it another time. If you want to do something about YEC, I'd be happy to come and talk about it. It's something
Sure.
I know really well. I know AIG, ICR, Discovery Institute. I know all their arguments. I've been doing it for 40 years. I'm very well versed in the science and all the arguments. So I just had to jump
Okay.
in because like I say, I love you to death. And I think that if I just had a few minutes, I could convince you that evolution is true and it is testable. And we know exactly how old the Earth is, out to at least 3, if not 4 decimal places in accuracy now. That's how accurate it is. And you
Thank
all
you,
have a
Dave.
good day, and you enjoy
You
the rest of your
too.
conversation.
Thank you so much. I think Joel is going to want to say something about this topic too, because this is an area of passion for him. So Joel, we'll give you the floor for a minute to talk about this, and then we want to return to our topic of, how we can help the world and effective altruism.
Oh, no, it's okay. And I got to probably reset here, as it looks like my icon didn't post. But no, I'd rather just try to answer those kind of questions. Of course, I've got really strong rebuttals to all of that. But yeah, no, I'd love to join in.
We want you to go ahead and respond, because I know you had some ways that you wanted to respond to Dave, and then we'll return to the normal conversation.
Well, yeah, Dave and I kind of went into it a little bit already in the text. So the idea that allele groups has anything to do with evolution is basically kind of it's a misrepresentation of the idea of evolution. Evolution is of course change over time, population growth and stuff like that. The Human Genome Project that he was appealing to actually basically says the exact opposite of what he was saying. Is that they all, whether you want to use the out of Africa or out of the Mesopotamia, point of origin for life, all humans have always been the same. And the Human Genome Project shows that. There's all kinds of really amazing geographic charts that they've published showing where humans migrated out of a central location
How long
went
ago?
all over the rest of the world, essentially. Oh,
How
hey, welcome
long
back,
ago?
Dave. And so
How
it
long
shows
ago?
that all the human populations are exactly identical. That we have not changed as a
Right.
population. We've spread across the planet. Allele groups are also what's called, in information science, we describe them as what's called a finite state machine set. So, and we use it in AI for lower level type decision trees to create kind of a mimicry, kind of a fake or an illusion, even if I may say, of a variety. So we have a way of basically having a contained list of possibilities, basically of decisions or alleles, or same thing, but they never leave that container group. The changes always stay in that group. So that's what we see in DNA. So blue eyes, red eyes, whatever, hair, yeah, the different colors and the different skin tones can change, but they're always the same. And that's why all humans can still mate, basically, because we're all the same species. We'll never change into a non-human, nor is there any evidence of humans ever being anything other than human.
Thank you, Joel.
How old did the Human Genome Project decide humanity was? And when did we leave Africa?
Let me see. I can get you the link. We can post it on the screen.
I know. I was
6,000
just asking
years.
you. It's 200,000 years. I just wanted Rebecca to know that Francis Collins, who is a devout Christian, head of the Genome Project, dates humanity at about 200,000 years, at least. That was just my point.
Yeah, I
Well-
love Francis Collins. I just disagree with him, but I do think he's a great Christian.
I
Well,
was
not only
the,
that,
the chat
Rebecca, Dr.
was
Collins
addressing
also
it like it was an
disagrees with what
atheist
atheists
issue.
associated with him. Dr. Collins is famous for saying how God could have evolved all life in 6 minutes.
Oh,
So
sure.
the idea that there has to be a static change of
No.
rate of age
My
is
my
irrelevant.
point was only the atheist argument that only atheists accept evolution. When like I say, Francis Collins is devout. He accepts the findings. He accepts evolution, and he kept his faith.
Well,
That was my only point.
The more precise way to describe all of that. So evolution theory itself is Christian creationist science exclusively. And so the more precise way of describing that, atheists disbelieve the actual science of evolution. They wish to dictate and always force the idea that it must have taken billions of years old for it to have, for all these
But
unfalsifiable religious
that's
mythological blind faith claims in
That's a
time.
that's a
Dr. Collins
biologist.
and all the other
Okay.
creationist science.
That's a
like Dr.
biologist
Collins.
claim.
Let
That's
me
a
finish.
biologist
Guys,
claim,
Dr. Collins,
not an
I
atheist
know
claim.
you're insecure about it. Dr. Collins falsifies that by saying
I
Hey,
it's
guys.
taken a couple 100,000 years,
But it's
Sorry
not an
to
atheist
interrupt,
claim.
but
So
you know what? I would love to have this conversation on a total, like a longer conversation, especially with Dave, and I'd love to go on and get you guys on another time to talk about this topic. But
Sounds
we
good.
do want to return to our topic of what we can do to save the world. How can we help the world? What are the big threats that are we're facing, and what's the best way to help people? What's the best way to save lives? So do you guys
Education.
have anything to say?
do
about that?
Education.
I was saying in your
Education raises people out of poverty. It empowers minorities. It empowers women. Education.
as long as we keep atheism out of education, like Max Planck said, atheism is going to destroy civilization. But Rebecca, I was saying in text how if we can do our own charity, like Jesus commanded, we said to take up our own cross daily, and for us to go out there and preach the gospel and to teach the world, to educate the world ourselves, that is the most effective way of making sure that our quote unquote resources, our money, our time is maximized to people. We're like doing it ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm. What does it look like for when you say do it yourself? What does that look like practically?
Well, like you're showing how you've gone to homeless people yourself and say, hey, look, I can either just throw money at you, or I can show you a charity that can give you some money, or let's find the techniques that we can help you solve your problems.
And education is a great tool behind that.
Why do you think do you mean personally volunteering instead of donating to charity is the most effective way to help?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Yeah, not
Why do you
taxes,
think-
right?
Because you know where the money's going and you know where your time's going, and you see the results directly, and you can account for and adjust whatever tactics or ideas you're doing without having to rely on somebody else.
If we looked at a population, like we do research on this, we look at a population of people that do volunteer work, and then we calculate, we come up with some standard to measure how much good they're doing, working in soup kitchens or helping homeless people, find homes or whatever. And then we look at people that work at an office job and then donate their money to charity, to the Against Malaria Foundation or something. And we both agree on a standard of how much we're improving people's quality of life. And in the first case, we find it's like 10 units of improving quality of life. And in the second case, it's 1,000 when people donate money to charity. That to me would seem like pretty good evidence that there's something that donating money to charity is doing that's more effective. I'm not saying that is the case, although I do think that it's much more effective to donate money to charity than to do volunteer work. But what I would say is it's an empirical question. So is there empirical evidence that personally volunteering is more effective than donating to charity?
Sure, I love the way you word that. Even so, I'm a data scientist today. I'm an information scientist, and so I love those types of analyses. That's what I do professionally, as a matter of fact. And so my first reaction is that you'll never be able to tell how effective somebody else's work is by asking them or trying to set up some sort of test data. We can collect other people's test data, and we can create different methods and different data mining type projects to try to analyze that data. But the data is always tainted. We always have to try to figure out where the biases are, where the inaccuracies are, and the only way you can really determine that is outside of that data. And so even if you think you have a good source, a gold set, as we call it, of data to mine against, you still have to have things to compare against it. And the most effective way of doing that is, again, doing it yourself. Go into that data set, go into whatever it is you're trying to test for, collect your own non-anecdotal, your actual empirical evidence, like you're talking about, outside of what somebody just shares with you anecdotally, to test it, to create a comparative model that you can say, okay, well, this is what someone says they did, this is what I saw them do, and see where the differences are. If that makes sense.
So if you knowledge or ability to do that, or to do that effectively. So the second is that's incredibly time consuming.
Oh yes.
The third is that
yes.
If I rely on something like GiveWell to evaluate a charity, not only do I think it's reasonable to rely on them to do that, I think they would do a better job than if I did it myself. These are people that are trained and capable of doing it.
Right. That's fine. That's I guess that's the difference between like an amateur data collection test versus more professional. So yeah, the guys like us that actually go out there and have to do the research in a kind of a co-platform, so to say, to create the test verification sets to actually get the more scientific results. That's why we get, or not us, but our companies.
Sure.
I wish I get the money. It's why the people that we work for get such large contracts, because it is very time consuming. We not only have to double, sometimes triple, sometimes quadruple the work. It is a massive effort. But again, that's the only way to get a scientific empirical analysis. Otherwise, it's pure anecdotal. You're taking people's words.
Calling it pure anecdotal, like you could say, is it pure anecdotal that Neptune exists? Is it pure anecdotal that we have treatments for malaria? Is it pure anecdotal that open heart surgery can help people with heart disease?
Results are, yes.
I'm not gonna do my own heart surgery. I'm gonna rely on someone that does a better job.
Well, that's the thing. To get the results, you have to trust what someone told you. That's anecdotal.
If you want to call that anecdotal, that's fine. Then I'm pro anecdote. I mean, you can label it how you like, but the bottom line is GiveWell is going to do a better job of assessing charities than I am, and probably than you are. I would put all my money on that. That's how confident I am that whoever works at GiveWell is better at assessing the quality of charities than you are. The idea that we and you are probably more competent than 99.999% of people that could go do these investigations themselves. A lot of people that would have to be trying to decide how to do good are not data analysts. They don't have the competence or experience to do that. So, do you think every single individual should personally go conduct research on every topic?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm
impossible.
I think I'm going to have
I could go.
Even experts defer to experts.
Guys, you're talking over each other.
Yeah.
But like, to give an example, I'm not a sound engineer. I could go on Amazon, I could look at the 4.5-star headphones and buy them. That's what I did. These headphones are good. The alternative to that would be for me to buy hundreds of different pairs of headphones and learn all about audio engineering, and then personally test them, spend hundreds, maybe thousands of hours doing that. And then at the end of that, I'd probably buy these anyway. So, because they're the 4.5. So,
but that's not logical, Lance. An audiophile will do that. An audiophile, he will go through at least certainly several dozens, but that's still anecdotal. What's up, Rebecca?
But Joel, I mean, you're kind of applying a ridiculous standard here, and I think that's the point Lance is trying to make. If I did what you're saying, when would I ever have time to help anyone? I would be like piled up in research, and I don't even have the tools to do that. And even if I did what you're suggesting, what would be problematic is that how would I even test the effect of my personal interaction with another human being? I can never know if that person that I helped directly might 20 years from now save thousands of people. And maybe, they wouldn't have done that if I hadn't helped them in, a personal act of service that may have seemed small. So even if I did all the research you're talking about, I'm not sure that I could actually anyone could ever come to a conclusion about, what is the most effective. Like, I think when we're looking at charities, I think Lance is making a good suggestion about, relying on GiveWell. Someone is echoing, by the way. relying on GiveWell, it seems like a trustworthy source to evaluate what's actually happening with various charities.
Right. So yeah, don't misunderstand. The only thing that I'm making a difference on is anecdotal versus scientific. To get scientific, you can't rely on that trust like you just said. So we can trust somebody, has done, some sort of level of, you could trust that me as a data scientist, that I went and did all that hard work to compare all the different charities. I compared all the different heart surgeries, that I do the result, that I did the data mining collection, and you can trust what I've said, or you have to go and get those same models. You have to go get the same experiences and do the same kind of work. So there's trust versus verify is the difference.
Yeah. A narrow conception of science.
Yes.
To do science, you wouldn't just characterize science as whatever research I've personally conducted. I didn't do Einstein's experiments or Galileo's experiments. I didn't do the 999,999. But why? I am
to verify. That's what science is. Science is not,
but no, I don't agree.
Science not blind faith.
Personally conducting experiments.
Yes, do
science
it.
Is an institution.
If you want to be able to work in the types of fields that I do, Lance, or anybody, you have to recreate Einstein's experiments. You have to show that not only do you understand them, but that you can do them. You have
to. Let's ask Jamie what he thinks is the best.
Physicists would do a better job than I would. I do not have to do that.
Well, that's why we won't hire you. It's okay. That's okay. Please, let's move on.
That's a fallacy. That's a
Respect
fallacy.
Respect the host.
Jamie, what ways have you found that are effective in helping the world? What do you think, what do you think is worthy to contribute to or to do for people who want to, benefit the world?
I think the way I was understanding the differentiation was, I thought he was going to say something about, I don't want to be political about it, but it's often brought up in a political concept as welfare or whatever. I mean, I think obviously you when you do it, like people will say before the welfare system, right? Which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I think it's problematic, but when you can do hands-on things, or when people have more money to give and they can do it as a community more personally, let's say, I think that's healthy for building character in the people who are giving the charity, as well as, brings the community together. Now that's really idealistic or whatever. There's obviously, it's got to be both, right? There's room for doing it through the government, but I think there should be more hands-on when it's, when it makes sense. Obviously, I think when you can learn things yourself, it's better, but it's just not feasible. In other words, so anyways, if that makes any sense, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It does. What I would say though is this idea that you have to personally conduct things. I mean, how would you even know where to begin unless you read what Galileo's experiments were in a textbook? And who wrote the textbook? Just an anecdote. How do you know Galileo did the experiment? I mean, in every single case in which we could do anything other than start with sticks and stones and like scratching our heads in the dirt, we are completely relying on the anecdotes of other people's previous scientific work. How we read and what we learn. I mean, how would you even study physics without reading a physics textbook? Which it's all anecdotal, the experiments in there. How optics, the instruments were designed. How do you know the instrument is reliable?
That's completely wrong.
Well, it's your experience, though. Yeah,
right.
It's verified through trusting it.
Well, and that's completely wrong, gentlemen. So whether or not somebody who doesn't, we don't care who wrote something down. We'll look at it. We'll look at Planck's experiments. We'll look at Einstein's experiments, and we'll try to test it for ourselves. And then that's and even if we do our own, like at SpaceX, we do things that no one else has ever done before. We figure things out, and even if we think that it works right and it's scientifically confirmable, we'll never believe it. Science never says what's true, never says what's fact. So the things that we think are true, we wish to rely on, we always test it again. So when we try to fast load our densified helium again, we want to make sure we don't cause the same explosion we had with the Amos 6, for example. We're going to test it again, even though we think we know how the quote unquote science works. We think we're real knowledgeable on laminar flow and all that kind of good stuff. we won't trust it. We'll never believe what we saw in the past. We'll test it again right there in real. That's what science.
I think you might have cut out there.
Yeah, I think he's frozen.
I guarantee he believes in the rocket formulas.
You guarantee he believes in what?
The rocket formulas.
Yeah, my YouTube messed up, guys. It's something weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dave said Joel, he guarantees that you believe in the rocket formulas. What's your response?
I'm not sure what a rocket formula is.
How much you can lift with how much fuel?
You mean thrust to weight ratios?
If that's what it's called, yeah.
Yeah, it's what we test. My point I was trying to make, if it didn't come across, guys, was that no matter what we think might be true, we always retest it. Science never confirms fact.
Right. And you want to go with a consensus. You want to go with a consensus of the experts, not by what one person says.
That was what Galileo taught us never to do.
Well, Joel, you're right in a sense, but I think
Not go by a
you still have to
consensus.
start with something,
Yes.
and then what you're going to try, or you're going to say, "Oh, this seems plausibly true based on experience and trust." There's faith that this isn't. It's kind of talking past each other. It's like there's faith involved, and that's where that's like a starting point. And yes, you're going to have reasons to reconfirm, certain equations of scientific ideas in physics, but ultimately you got to start somewhere. So, I mean, yeah, I agree. It's not like absolute truth or whatever, but that's life. Like faith is a necessary thing, I think.
Well, so yeah, even the Christian scientific method, the first step is a faith-based philosophical hope, in your hypothesis, that your hypothesis, you have faith that it could be true, right? Just like the Bible says, faith is the hope in the things we believe are true. That's the first step of the scientific method. And so you try to build your experiments, try to do your science based on the faith that your theory is reliable. And then we never confirm it. You always try to retest it.
Yeah, I don't agree with that concept. Like science confirms things all the time. I don't this conception that like science can only falsify, not confirm. I just don't buy it. Science has confirmed the sun exists. Seems true to me. Science has confirmed that smoking can cause heart disease. So science confirms things are true. That's not a problem.
Hey guys,
yeah.
Can we because we're starting to get back on the science stuff,
Right.
but I told Lance we would wrap it up at 3 hours. So I think this is a good time to do a final question. And I'll end with Lance since he was the guest, but I'll start with maybe Dave. What changes to the world do you most hope to see in your lifetime?
One of the greatest changes we have that helps humanity is science. Science saves children from terrible diseases. Science grows enough food for everybody to eat. Science is a great tool to help people. It truly is. It's done that, the only reason we have enough food for everybody is because of science. So it is something to be embraced to help humanity. And again, with education empowers people. Like a lot of these disagreements over different things, the way to know is to get educated on them. And if you want to have a specialty, specialize in it. And when you're talking about everybody can't know everything, no scientist knows everything. Every scientist relies on a specialty scientist. If you go to the doctor, your doctor sends you to this doctor for a test, that doctor for a test. They rely on specialties in their fields so that they know them very, very, very well. And if you really, really, really want to know something very, very well, go to school and learn it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Dave. Jamie, what's your answer to that? What changes to the world do you most hope to see in your lifetime? Are you there, Jamie? Maybe he stepped away. Joel, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Yeah, it'd be wonderful if everybody could just, agree with Jesus, to love our neighbors and our enemies as ourselves. And yeah, I think that if everybody followed science, they'd understand we can't do science without God. I love how Einstein put it. He says he wants to know how God created the world. We're not interested in this or that phenomenon, the spectrum of this or that element. Einstein says, I want to know God's thoughts. The rest are details. And like Bacon put it as well, developing the scientific, method even, the more, a little bit of science takes us away from God, but a lot of science brings us back. And so I'll agree with Dave that, the more science that we do to solve problems, not only does it help solve, it does, Dave, not only does science solve problems, but it leads us to God, who literally the only thing God says, his greatest commandments, is to love him and love everybody as themselves. That would solve all of our problems.
I'm all for the golden rule, but it predates Christianity and Judaism. But I do support the golden rule.
Not at all.
Cool. I want to put a couple of comments up here with the audience responses to this. Matthew Simpson says, I appreciate the real subject of the stream. Education and a greater emphasis on selflessness and empathy seems like what the world needs.
God's golden rule does not predate religion. Sorry.
And then Doubting Thomas says improving critical thinking in mass and improving critical environment. Okay, I think he's trying to say thinking about the environment. I don't know. Anyway, Lance, what's your answer to that? What changes do you hope to see in the world in your lifetime?
I think the ones I want to see are more technological in nature. So I would want to see an end to human aging through biotechnology. I would want to see space colonization take place. I'd like to see us start colonizing other planets, building space stations, extracting resources from asteroids, basically making use of the entire solar system. Of course, education is going to be relevant to that, but I want the outcomes to be ones that are practical. The benefits of radically advancing our technology would be to drastically minimize human suffering. I think with that degree of resource acquisition, a lot of the conflicts that currently drive humanity and a lot of the suffering, you would have less poverty, you would have less motivation for war. So I think the world would just be a much better place if we could get those technologies. How to get there is its own separate question, but that's what I want to see. End of aging, advances in space colonization, hopefully other sorts of advances. So maybe something like brain emulations or artificial general intelligence that could be effectively and safely utilized to solve problems that we face that we're not able to address on our own. So those
Rebecca,
sorts of things.
If I may, real quick.
Yes,
Sure.
yes, the Lance. Yes.
I don't know,
I
Lance.
love what you got to say, brother.
Since it's the first time we met,
Thank
Lance,
you.
if we can have another chance to talk again with Rebecca or otherwise, I used to work for Elon Musk, so I can love to talk with all of those advances you just mentioned, from the space colonization to the Neuralink projects. All those things that you just answered are in the works.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
I got plenty to say about Elon too. Yeah, no, you want to talk about Elon? I'm still waiting for his second manned mission to Mars 2 years ago.
No, it's always been scheduled for 2026.
Well, I want to put up
no.
Zing's answer to my question, what he would like to see the change happen in his lifetime. The best thing for human progress is to give up the imaginary boogeyman in the sky. And I'll give my answer, Zing. I think that the opposite is true. I think God is the source of life. He's the source of love. And what I would like to see is for people to come to know God, experience his love, experience reconciliation and peace with him through Jesus Christ. And I think that will actually be the best thing for the world, because, Jesus does change people. And I think, Jesus is the answer for the salvation of the world. And so that's where I'm putting my hope. And I do also agree that advancements in technology are great. And I'm looking forward to advancements in technology. And I hope that we do truly, put an end to things like, disease and different, things that plague the world, the hate, the violence. And I think, all of that is part of what God wants for humanity. So I totally agree with you guys about the importance of advancing in all things that contribute to humans prospering. Does anybody have any final thoughts?
I was going to ask, if it's not too rude, Rebecca, that if I can offer to host a live stream of myself on my channel to answer a lot of
Great.
the technological questions if you guys want to follow later today.
Well, I won't be able to do it later today because I'm doing another stream with Sal on my Evolution channel. And if whoever's not subscribed to that, I have another channel called Examining Evolution, and Sal's going to come on there and talk. So I can't do it today, Joel, but I would love to come on your channel sometime. And so set up a stream and let me know, please.
Well, when is your stream with Sal?
This evening at well, it's at 10:30 Eastern. So
PM?
Yeah. What's that?
Did you say 10:30 like as in PM or
10:30 PM Eastern? Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I can start one here in 15 minutes, but
You can what?
I was thinking about starting one here probably at maybe at 4 or 5 p.m. Central, which
Yeah,
2
but
hours.
for me, I've been on this stream for 3 hours and I need to go do some other things now. So,
Understood.
but I would love to come on your stream sometime, Joel. So please, yeah, let's make a plan.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Lance, for being
Thank you.
here. Yeah, thank you to everyone in the chat. And does anyone else, Lance, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I'm happy with you having the final word on this topic.
Okay. All right. Bye, everyone. God bless you.